Evening, folks. It's morning in South Africa. Okay, look at some of these comments here. Let's see. Yep, it is just let's see, 21:20. So like about 9:20 p.m. for me. Why are you here? I'm just going to sleep. I mean, you can. I just figured, well, this might be a nice way to unwind a little bit before I go to sleep. I just got back up from my long drive back from a final. Oh yeah, somebody asked about the drive. Yeah, it was near 4 hours today, but the exam finished right at rush hour, so it was either stay down there for extra hours, which I can't really afford to do because of the dog, or sit through the traffic. So I sat through the traffic. Let's see. Sleep in the door. Let's see. Oh, people are popping up here. There's that. What are you doing, man?
Hi, Leah. I'm gonna say a few words. I'm on the East Coast. It's 12:30. I have to get up every morning at 6 to get my daughter to school. So your school break is gonna be my nightmare, okay?
I'm gonna try and do some of these earlier in the day. Actually, today is unusual because I had to go down the hill for a final, but the rest of them are all submitting. The rest of the things I'm getting this week are all submitting online, so I don't have to leave again. So I'll
Okay,
probably start going online closer to when it starts to get too cold to work outside or do anything else, or I just start to
okay,
wind down mentally
okay.
from grading.
Yeah, have
So
some mercy on the East Coasters.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I'll do some that are much earlier in the day. This is more just because, well, why not? It was a long drive back, and it's too late for me to do anything else. So it's out of this or watch a movie. Figured I'd check in for a little while, see if anybody wants to talk about anything, and if it winds down quickly, then I'll go to sleep.
Okay. I feel like a zombie, so I'm not gonna stay late, but there are things start cooking that, with the revolution, you have the three stages, right? It's like agitate, educate, and organize, right? So there are things coming through with organization. I will send you in DM a website that I think is worth. It's trying the people trying to collect us together for the general strike. Let me know what you think. I will send you the website, and I also send you the guy who is also on the TikTok, one of the guys who is behind this website. So you can look his content, see who the guy is, and see if it's worth it. This is like General Strike US, so it's kind of getting us together for all kind of causes. So the cause itself is not up there. They're trying to collect like 10 million people, and so we can actually do something. Okay. So I just want you to let you know. I just gonna DM you right now after I get off the site. But as always, love you, appreciate you, and I'll stay for a little bit, but I might just knock out.
Yeah, it's fine. Like I said, I'll be on much earlier, on other days this week. But this is when I got home and managed to get something else uploaded.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks for the update there too. If you send something along, I I'm always very hopeful, at least, about general strikes, but Americans tend to be terrible about them. So I really hope that there's enough people who care. It'll be a good way to see, like, how this works. Like, if enough people care about this issue to actually do something, it'll be a nice way to see what our numbers are like.
Well, yeah, let's see how it works. I'm not I wanted to be content creator, but now with all the topic, I decided it's not the time. So I'm not a content creator now. I'm just I'm getting all the information, and I'm jumping on lives and spreading the word. And so that's my job for now. Okay. So if any DMs, if any, there's like something good coming along, I'm going to shoot, your way too, because you have a lot of Americans on your life. So it would be good to spread the word. But thank you. Appreciate you very much. Night.
My pleasure.
Good morning, all. Oh, she's disappeared. I was going to say we need all kinds of content creators. Yeah, everybody with their skill set, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, making graphics and stuff is not my strength.
Hello.
Someone said hello. Hello.
Um, are you on your winter break now?
I am. I mean, such that it is. I mean, I
Yeah.
have so much to do during it, but at least I don't have the commutes for a while.
Right, right.
I've got 2 weeks without the drive, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. And then in January, I still have to go down like 4 days a week, but it's only for one like long morning class, so I won't have the traffic coming back up that I get in the evenings.
Oh,
So
nice, nice.
it's not
So
until
it's,
it gets nasty again.
I hear you. I own a preschool, and whenever there's time off, I still have a lot of work to do during that time off. It's the time for everything else that I haven't been able to do.
Yep, I got that. I got a ton of grading to do. I have
Yeah.
there's a chapter I'm writing for an edited volume on academic freedom that I got to get finished sometime in the next 5-6 weeks. So I'm going to do that during the break. And then I've got a few last projects to finish before the snows get here. It's getting cold out there, but there's no snow yet, so I've got time to finish the fence and gate and whatnot.
Gotcha. Well, we're rooting for you with the fence. I feel like you've been working on it.
Yeah, it's a pretty big project to do by yourself. I mean, it's not like a little
Yeah.
piddly thing.
Yeah. Normally there's a couple people working on that.
Right, and that do it more often, so they're faster at least.
Right.
And the biggest problem I've had lately is just putting the stain on the wood. It takes forever to dry.
Oh, I know. It's crazy. Yeah. But better than doing it in super hot weather. That's the worst.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah. It works at least nicer.
Yeah. True. Okay, so I have two questions that are pretty specific, I think. Do you want me to tell you both of them or just one at a time?
I have no preference.
Okay.
I don't have my notepad yet, so maybe one at a time.
Okay.
I had to find piece of paper. But
I'm going to start with the uplifting one, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm sort of newer to more in-depth activism. I've done like little things here and there. But the type of, I think, demonstration and activism that is needed right now, I believe is a bit more complex than what I've done and what a lot of people have done. And I'm looking for a book, and I've a book just to kind of inspire some successful uprisings. I'm thinking about the autobiography of Malcolm X, or there's a couple different that I feel like are kind of applicable to what's happening in the world right now, and especially in my country, the United States. Woo! And so anyway, I was just wondering if there were any that you might recommend. I have I talked to you about, I belong to a group of folks all over the world who are also wanting to do everything they can. And so some of us, might enjoy reading a book together.
Let's see.
And I think like inspiring and informational,
Right.
No.
Was where did I put that? Hey, get out of that! You drinking that? That's mine. You cat. Cat's taking my drink.
Water is cat water.
That's mine. Gosh, where did I put it? Here's that and that, and then all this stuff on revolutions, not really relevant. There's something. Oh, maybe this is it. Hey, cat. Turkey. Not sure if this will. Probably not. Okay, so first things that pop into my head. Well, I guess the very first thing that would pop into my head is stuff out of the unions and anarchist traditions. So things like direct action and strike. You want to see like positive stuff about strikes, although, yeah. Oh, actually, I remember that setting now. Let's see. That is right here. How about, is this it? Ooh, that's weird looking. So, is this look right? That looks right?
Wow.
This is more like histories of direct action and strikes. So it gives you a sense of, if you have more time to dive into it, that stuff like this does work. It does take a bit of work. Some things about thinking about like anti-fascist or anti-racist action. These are more recent stories of places where people got together and actually, beat up Yahtzees and stuff, chase them out of areas where they were growing in strength.
It was we go.
We go where they go.
Okay.
So basically, like, where the Yahtzees show up, you show up too, and face off with them. And then it did happen here is actually about stuff that happened up in like the Portland area when I was a kid. I mean, some of my father's family is up in Oregon, and it was racist as hell when I was young. It has changed a lot in the last few decades, which is nice. But there's
That's where I'm from.
Yeah. Okay.
So
cool.
what time period are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about like
you were a kid there.
The 70s.
Okay.
There was still plenty of that stuff around. But it's been tapering off. But there's still plenty of white supremacists in the area that still like to come in and cause problems. So people have been fighting them for a while. And then thinking just in general about how to organize. So these are two neat ones on organization. So rules for revolutionaries, how organizing helps, and then ideas for action. So kind of a how to get together and do stuff. Of course, there's fun classics like the one that the right loves to hate, like Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Ooh, everyone's always like the Republicans love citing that and have never actually read it. Let's see. Put this background. Hi. You're being a pain in the butt.
So much.
Pushing on the camera, stealing my water. You're just a little pain in the butt today. Look at you.
Oh.
Little rat.
Okay.
She's gotten very, very trusting in me over the years. Oh, Anarchist Handbook. Yeah, that's yeah, everything from making your own weapons to making your own acid. Like the not I mean the fun kind of acid. All kinds of weird stuff in that.
How are you, Professor?
Howdy. Yeah, good.
Good. Hi, Liam. How's everything?
Oh, pretty good.
So we needed you really, really bad today. We DM'd you. We sent you a message. I know you're always very busy, but on Kim Tight's live, there was a huge debate on whether Jews were Judaism and ethnicity. That was the subject, and so it was huge. And we thought only of you.
Right.
We were like, we got to get Liam on, and
Uh,
so I know you were very busy, but
there's
we wanted your insight because you being Jewish and being a historian would have been a big help.
Um, I think we might have to ask what Liam's ethnicity is actually, because yeah. Liam, do you want to elaborate more on your ethnicity? Because I think there's some misconceptions.
well, I mean, depends on what you want to call it. I'm Jewish, but my family's background is split from all over the place in Europe. So I'm Irish, Polish, Sicilian, Bulgarian, Scots. They're giant mixed up, massive stuff.
So
Well,
I'm,
I my second question, and then I'll get down for whoever else wants to come up.
Did we want to talk about the question of like
yeah. So the main question was
ethnicity?
whether being
Oh,
Jewish,
sorry.
whether being Jewish was an ethnicity or not.
Yeah, it's the fun thing about this is actually it's on some level a weird question, but I kind of get it because we've sort of like forgotten how things were. Judaism really wasn't thought of as a religion until at earliest the 18th century. It just wasn't a thing. Jews were Jews, and Jews had certain practices and they did certain things. But as you start moving into the modern period and people start thinking about religion as more of a private practice that people do instead of like big civic rituals and, connected into states and whatnot, but something you just believe, then there came to be a certain pressure to make Judaism seem like a religion, like a set of beliefs that people could have. And there were some people, some more like modernizing trends in Judaism that kind of embraced this idea out of, America, sort of like European Protestant trends, but there was a significant pushback in the Jewish community. Traditionally, Judaism is better thought of as like an ethical civilization, ethical in the sense of following rules. So it's like there's a set of laws, a set of traditions that govern your life. This is what I do in the morning. This is, how I live. This is what I take care of with kids and this and that. And belief was kind of irrelevant. And in many ways it still is, which makes it strange as a religion because Jews can be atheists and still be perfectly good Jews, and everyone's going to say, yep, he's a great Jew. Because being a Jew is about how you live. It's about practices, which is one of the ways that I guess I am a terrible Jew because I don't much practice things anymore. There's a handful of things that I still hold on to as traditions because, did stuff for decades, it sticks around, but it's not really a part of my life in that way. But the ritual is actually the important part about it, how you organize your life, the traditions that you follow. So Jews' beliefs fall all over the place, in terms of how they think of the world and how they think of, God and everything else. And that's never really mattered at all because Judaism was a thing that you did, not a thing that you believed. And religion in the modern world is thought of as something that you believe. Whereas in the ancient world, religion was much more something that you did. It was more of a set of practices. In the ancient world, religions didn't have a lot of real complicated beliefs to them. It was more like, I'm going to say a prayer to the god of door locks to protect my house when I leave my house in the morning, and I'm going to make a small offering to him to keep my house safe. So there's a transactional relationship. You're doing something. But if that god doesn't help out, then screw it. You can just, use a different god or something. There's no there's no sense of conversion because it's not really a belief system that matters. In the contemporary world, people tend to think that religions have a kind of a coherent cosmology, a set of theology. There's like certain beliefs to them. And Judaism, because of its antiquity, has a lot of elements that are much more like the ancient way of understanding religions than, say, Christianity and Islam and tons of more recent faiths than that focus a lot more on key beliefs that you have to hold on to. So, anyway, so if anybody wants like a fun kind of run through some of the changes, this was a neat text here, how Judaism became a religion. It's like a short history of the debates in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century about how people started thinking about Judaism in a different way to kind of match the way that people were thinking of religions in the modern world. So it essentially had to become a religion where it was really just the practices of a specific group of people. It looks like there's a debate on like,
Yeah.
is that a debate about whether or not I'm Jewish? I
No,
mean,
no, not at all. Not at all. Kim is
okay,
on right now. He's listening to you as we speak. He had a live on today. It was very interesting, but you had half the panel that was split on whether Jews and their ethnicity, whether they identify their ethnicity by being Jewish. And so, yeah, so that's what we were talking about. So whether it was culture, food, and so on. And a lot of people seemed confused, and
specific practices and traditions that you
that's
take
why I
on.
was trying to invite you, but I knew you were busy. So yeah, maybe
Yeah,
we can get to tomorrow's live.
one thing that I think helps
Um,
some people too is just understanding what we mean by ethnicity, because ethnicity doesn't mean descent. It's not like a blood thing. That's, again, race, ethnicity, and nation are all kind of like made up, flexible concepts. There's a set of practices, and people have always converted into different nations and different ethnicities and whatnot. It's always happened. So wherever Jews have spread to, other people marry into it. And when you do that, you become a Jew. Like the whole process of conversion, like you're only a convert during that time. And then afterwards, you're a Jew, and you're a Jew for the rest of your life. It's just, that's the way that works, halachically, like in terms of Jewish law. Because people have been converting to Judaism for thousands of years. It's something that's well understood within halacha. So it's not, there's tons of different ways that people think about ethnicity, and especially in a US concept, people tend to have very hard ideas about what ethnicity and race mean that come out of our own racist history, but they aren't really what the terms mean. And there's a lot of places where they have to be understood differently. Like what it means to be an Arab is to be a native speaker of Arabic or descended from native speakers of Arabic. So it has nothing to do with what you look like or physical descent or anything else. Or like to be Han Chinese. The Han Chinese ethnicity is to be from a specific region that was part of the Han dynasty. Doesn't matter what language you speak, what you look like, what your food is, what your dress is, everything else. So the Han ethnicity is a very different concept than, say, like the difference between like Scots and Poles or something. So the word ethnicity is used in a whole bunch of different ways. Jews are an ethnic group that all kind of look different because they're from all over the world and have always been, interacting with different people.
Okay, yeah, I think you just answered it. Thank you. Okay,
Hey,
hold on though,
doctor.
Free Palestine. I
yeah.
think that somebody has actually asked an additional question to this because it feels like there might be more elaboration that's
Oh,
needed.
as far as the generations,
No. Somebody says, so why did my DNA say I was 2% Jewish? I'm assuming it said 2% particular, like Ashkenazi Jew, but yeah, could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, all they're doing there is you can identify in certain populations in the world that were relatively homogenous for a period of time certain genetic markers because mutations happen in particular groups of people. So that's all that means. Having a little bit of descent from a particular group of Jews somewhere in the world doesn't make someone Jewish, because Jew isn't a race and races don't really exist. Ethnicity is a social category. It's always been a social category. How different ethnicities are defined depends upon the particular rules governing it. But ethnicity, just like essentially race and nation, are social constructs. And being descended from some Jew in the past, in every understanding of Judaism, has never made you a Jew. If your mother is Jewish, you're a Jew. But if, like, your paternal grandfather is Jewish and you weren't raised Jewish, so you don't have any of the traditions, no one will call you a Jew. It doesn't make sense because it's largely the practice of it. There's a born into it in the sense if you're born into a Jewish family with a Jewish mother, you're born to a Jewish mother, you're considered a Jew. And that's one part of the, that's the only place where descent actually factors into that. And that's because of a specific feature in halakha. But it's the only place where anybody cares about descent in this context.
Hey,
I
doctor, can I
think,
just,
sorry,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. Well, I just want, from my perspective, I mean, and I've been in quite a few lives where this, people, search for the right word to use. And I've kind of, my perspective is that it's almost a cultural nationalism, a shared experience that people all over the world can understand. And, to your point, my son was not raised Jewish, but I need to make him, because of his name, I had to make him aware of some of those traditions, and we celebrate a few of the holidays, and pull a Hanukkah present out from underneath the Christmas tree, all that kind of stuff. But but to the point, back in Germany in the 30s and 40s, yes, that 2% great grandfather Judaism was going to be an issue, if I'm not mistaken.
In that specific it's because they had a racial definition of it, because they were scientific racists, and all of it was made up. I mean, they were using like calipers to measure noses, which does not work. And it wasn't 2%. It was like a grandparent or something. It didn't go that far back. So if it was like within living memory, there is somebody who is recognizably Jewish and then they intermarry, then they'll consider them to be a Jew in that sense. But even in those contexts, a lot of people who were only like a quarter or whatever Jewish, they were left alone frequently, if they were raised in Christian families.
Blessed.
Is everybody okay being patient while we try and explore this fully? Or
Totally. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we were going in this route. I didn't realize there was a question. So apologies.
I think no, I think it's okay, Lisa. It's just that
Squishy.
several people mentioned
Sorry.
it.
Yeah, somebody had asked.
It
Somebody
seemed
had
to be
sent
a
a
hot
message.
button topic.
Blessed.
Did I?
Nasser has a very good question there. He's
Oh, we need
asking you
you.
to
And
ask.
I was.
Yes.
and I was busy at the time, so.
So Nasir asks the follow-up question, says, can you ask if Jewish people had the necessary elements to be called a nation before 1948?
Before 1948, yes, but not that far back, because while race, nation, and ethnicity are all flexible social categories and in some regards are interchangeable, there's a few specific contexts. When we think about nation, we're generally thinking about the constituent elements of a political nationalism, and Jews did not have a nationalism. They did have a common understanding of themselves as Jews, so on some level, you could say that there was a Jewish nation, but it would be an incredibly diverse one, because South Asian Jews and Polish Jews didn't have much in common in terms of the way they lived beyond Torah. But there were a few things in common, and it's arguable within the literature inside Judaism they would have thought of it as a nation. And actually the words in Hebrew talking about this, it would have referred to it as a nation, but it didn't have a political nationalism. So in that context, we have to say, no, that did not exist until the later 19th century with the rise of Zionism. But the first Zionist works is published in 1862. So by the middle of the 19th century, a nationalist movement is beginning to emerge out of the Haskalah, out of the Jewish Enlightenment in the 19th century. And in that way, definitely from that point, there is a kind of nascent Jewish nation. But again, in a different sense, you could say that there was a nation already, just a weird one that's like incredibly diverse and widely scattered, but still a common sense of Jewishness. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what makes a nation a nation. It's like nations are, you pick certain features that you consider to be fundamental, and what those are can vary a lot. So, given the handful that they had, you could work with that. But it wouldn't be enough to actually have any kind of nationalist movement until the revival of Hebrew and the political Zionist movement building up in Eastern Europe. That kind of pre-existing Jewish nation could not have had a political identity in any sense.
A couple of things, and somebody jump in if I need to be corrected. But one, it is that sense of national identity that Israelis have, and I feel might be challenged with um, the idea of Palestinian people. Because if you have a single state of Palestinians and Israelis, then is there a Jewish nation?
Well,
And I think there's
yeah.
also a second part of, well, if you don't have that Jewish identity, then it challenges history, because I think that's somewhere there's always been a sticking point of did the Jewish identity exist before 1948? I don't know if, yeah.
Yeah. The the first thing you have to do is you have to uncouple nation and state, because they're totally different things. Israel is a state, and as a state, it has like political institutions. If you completely reform or recreate a state so it's a state of both peoples, then it's a different state, and that changes, but it doesn't change the nation at all, because a nation is just a group of people. Nations don't have any actual political component to them. They can have a political ideology aimed at creating a state, but nations never have anything to do with politics. Nations don't have armies. Nations don't have borders. All the kind of stuff that we tend to associate with states just don't exist. A nation is just a group of people with certain common features. And again, what those are can vary. So it can be a common religion, it can be a common language, it can be a common, like, food, like certain cultural elements, it can be certain ritual traditions, and there's all kinds of things that can go into what you choose to be it, which is why you can have weird ass shit like Christian nationalism or white nationalism. Like, because what makes up a nation varies tremendously. But nations aren't states, nations aren't countries. Those are three completely different things. So being Israeli is a political identity. It's part of a state. And that's something that can be questioned. Israeliness does not exist until 1948. There's no such thing as being an Israeli until 1948, when the state is created. But there were Jews and there were Zionists. So there was a Jewish nation, like a Jewish cultural identity, and there was a political movement bringing them together, Zionism, which was a goal to create a state. So they were a nation with a political ideology, but they were not a state. So Israeliness didn't exist. So I think we have to kind of like separate those two concepts for people. Israeliness is a new thing.
I
Jewishness is
think,
definitely.
yeah, I think that's where the challenge is, because it seems like as if whenever there's a conversation about this, first of all, there's a conflation between being Jewish and being Zionist, and I think that one's an easy one to be able to decouple. But being Israeli, or belonging to the state of Israel, and being Jewish is the one that's a lot more difficult to uncouple, because it feels like it's used interchangeably, not necessarily in the sense of the language, but more in the sense of people saying, no, this is a Jewish state and it needs to remain a Jewish state, otherwise we don't exist.
That's the nationalism. That's because Zionism stuck around in the absence of an actual constitution that could have created an actual functioning national identity tied to the state. Without that, Zionism stuck around, and Zionism is an ethno-nationalism from the 19th century. So they are still a group of people Jews as such, Jews who have a Zionist identity, who want a state to represent their interests alone. So that issue is still there. And that's a complex issue to kind of like decouple, because you've got generations raised with that understanding of what the Jewish state means, that it has to be an ethno state. And it doesn't have to be. You can have a state that absolutely protects and cherishes the Jewish identity without it being an ethno state. But people have to learn to think of things a bit differently in order to get to that point. So the key issue there is separating Zionism from Judaism, and not just, again, separating it from the religion. And this is what some people often do when they're putting to groups like Neturei Kartai. They point to some of like the Haredi groups and like, they're like the real Jews. No, they're not. I mean, Jews always argue with each other. There's a bazillion Jewish groups in the world, and they all hate each other at the end of the day. The Neturei Kartai is one specific faction of Haredim, and the Haredim all are factional and opposing each other all the time. They're not real Jews any more than any other Jew is Jewish. They're just anti-Zionist for religious reasons, for their understanding of Torah. But tons of people can be Jewish and oppose Zionism in different ways too. The key here is to separate not just a sense of like the religion or religious practice, but from Jews as an ethnic group. And there's an intentional effort to conflate Jews as an ethnicity and the Israeli state identity. And that's a common problem that you see in the US and parts of Europe and some other countries where Jews have been taught to identify themselves somehow with the Israeli state and its project. So it's become a part of some people's identity, but that's not universal. I know tons of Jews around me that don't think of it that way, that don't feel that state is part of their identity. But for some people it is, because there's been an effort to squish those ideas together for people. But if you really want to understand Jewish identity separately from the Israel-Palestine conflict, then you have to understand that the ethnic group of Jews is different from Israeli. There's a completely different issues that people are consciously trying to squish together for political reasons. Yeah, I just saw that there's 2 there and 1 person dropped. It was 6 for a while, so.
Yeah, perfect. I'll hand over to Kim. But yeah, I do feel like this needs to be explored fully and deeply. So I appreciate everybody's patience. Kim, did you want to ask a question? I had another one, but I'll let you do it first.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Omara. Thank you for your time, by the way. I appreciate it. So yeah, I hosted a live earlier today, and it got pretty heated, and it made me uncomfortable, just because I don't feel that I'm educated enough to host that type of discussion. And I think I hold a lot of pro-Palestinian lives, just trying to get the information out about the Palestinian struggle. And Mo Pesci, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he came up and he was very adamant that, Judaism was not an ethnicity for this, that, and the other reason. And I feel that a lot of that sentiment comes from his identity as a Palestinian, and feeling, the pressure from the Israeli state that's been around for 75 years. And it did get to a point where I felt that it was getting anti-Semitic. Although I don't think that that's how he meant it. I think it just comes more from his identity as a Palestinian more than anything.
And it gets complicated, because we can understand the reasons why it would make sense to fall into those habits. But when you're trying to delegitimize someone else's identity, you're falling into exactly the same trap that the Israelis have done to Palestinians. Israelis repeatedly denied that Palestinians are a people and that Palestinians have an identity. So for Palestinians to do the same thing there to Jews around the world, it's wrong in exactly the same way. So it's something that we do have to be able to address inside the community here in our kind of like safe spaces. Okay, we're on the same page here. We're all fine with Palestinians. This is great, but we can't be attacking Jews in racist ways too. So I think we really need to find ways to help people to decouple the sense of Zionist and Israeli nationalism from Jews as an ethnic group in the world. because it's not just specific religious factions. Jews can come in all shapes and sizes all around the world, and they're all Jews. And being a Jew is an ethnic identity. It already is a kind of national identity that has nothing to do with Israel at all.
I think Tati actually mentioned something interesting, and I think that's where one place where there's a common misunderstanding. She said they are. Oh, bear with me. I think she mentioned. Oh, she mentioned Arab. Hold on, sorry. She said they are Arab, Druze, Sudani, Ethiopian. That all live in Israel and are Israeli. The thing is that some of those, so for example, Ethiopians are Jewish. They are Jewish Ethiopians as well as Jewish Arabs. But because of the I think the racism that exists within that identity, it can some people are denied their identity fully because even though they practice and are practicing Jewish people, they are seen more as their Ethiopian identity. Could you look more into
That's
that?
Yeah, that's a reflection of the European racism that came with the Ashkenazim that created the state. They brought a lot of those fucked up white supremacist colonial attitudes with them. As far as Jews are concerned, the Beta Israel are Jews. That's just period. You know, they're Jews, right? There's no way around that. Same with like all the Arab Jews, right? So, you know, the different communities that spread all across the Arab world, speaking Judeo-Arabic, whatever, they're culturally Arabs and they're culturally Jews. They had a hybrid identity, and they are unambiguously Jews. In the context of Israeli identity has a European ethnic racism tied to it as well. And there, a lot of people have faced discrimination. So tons of Arab Jews chose not to pass on their language, chose to deny their own culture and history, and then assimilated into this Ashkenazi-derived identity when the state was founded. And then with a ton of the Beta Israel that moved there, they ran into anti-black racism because, hello, again, a bunch of European settler colonists created the state, and they were racist. So while they're Jews, people hold them out as a kind of like, well, are they really fit to be Israelis? They're kind of like needed because the state wanted numbers, I guess, for the demographic issue, but there's still a lot of people are tetchy about it in that sense. But again, it's different. It's different from the sense of like the Jewish ethnic identity versus the Israeli state identity, which again is an ethnocracy and a political identity. There you can have significant problems with treating some Jewish groups as equals. But within Judaism, Jews are Jews, and it's defined more by your traditions and your practice. And there's no way to separate, the Ethiopian Jews from the rest of Judaism.
Not to cut you off, but how many times I bring this argument up and I say, for instance, hey, Joe Schmo, where's your grandfather from? And they'll tell you right away, oh, we're from Morocco, we're from Algeria. I'm like, so you're an Arab Jew. Like there were Arab Jews in Palestine pre-48. And they go into this crazy mode. No, I'm an Israeli. I get it. But ethnically, you're from there. You're from Morocco. Your grandparents are from Iraq. And they hate to even identify as Arab Jews. They almost don't want to be synonymous with Arabs.
Right. And that kind of fits somebody mentioning right here in the comments. Can someone define ethnicity? This ties into this because what you're saying there, it makes sense from a certain point of view. But you're talking about descent. You are descended from Moroccan Jews. Therefore, you're Moroccan. Well, no, because if somebody has changed their ethnic identity, and that happens, people change national identities all the time. I mean, how many Americans still walk around and define themselves as being like Lithuanian? It blends together. You become an American. I mean, and honestly, some people in the U.S. do hold to these identities, and I know a lot of people who would say like, I'm Irish. Well, no, I'm not Irish. I'm fucking from California. I'm an American. I'm not Irish. I'm not from Ireland, but I am partly of Irish descent. That doesn't make me Irish. My ethnic identity is a Californian. This tendency to look into the past and into descent, right? It works within some ethnic contexts and not others. When people have moved to Israel and they have abandoned that past identity and assimilated into a new culture, they have chosen to become Israelis. And hence, Israeli actually is their ethnic identity now. But they do have descent from other parts of the world. Ethnicity is a very flexible concept. It's not biological. When people take race and ethnicity and make them biological concepts, they're literally using 19th century pseudoscience. They're using 19th century race science. It's literally racist to argue that way, because there's nothing about our descent that makes us a race or an ethnicity. Ethnicities are always cultural. Traditions have always been able to encompass new people. Somebody moves into your valley from 50 miles down and marries into the family, and they become a part of your community. So they have adopted your ethnic identity, and their kids have your ethnic identity because it's tied to a location and a set of traditions. Humans have always gone around fucking each other. We've always intermingled everywhere. What you identify with ethnically is in many ways a choice. It's part of your community. Sometimes it's forced on you by outside communities. So there's a lot that this is where racism comes in. So, you can be forced into a mold or a category by societies. But when you're not forced into it, it's largely a choice. It's a combination of those two factors. But don't think of it in terms of blood descent, because blood descent has literally nothing to do with ethnic identities. Ethnic identities are sets of cultural traditions and practices. They're beliefs, they're identities.
Direction first. So, who are the Ashkenazi Jews, the Mizrahi Jews, the Sephardic Jews? Who are they, and are they an ethnic group? Sorry,
There
I'm
are,
paraphrasing somebody's question in the
yeah,
comments.
sort of. There are subdivisions within it. So you can think of a Jewish within a broader Jewish nation, and again, setting aside the concept of Israel, because we're talking about nation in the sense of like the pre-Israel like Jewish nation, like the sense of common Jewishness. Within that nation, there are separate regional ethnic identities. What makes Sephardim is speaking, Ladino. So they're defined by speaking a form of medieval Spanish. What made Ashkenazim was originally Yiddish, speaking a form of medieval German, and having that kind of common origin in what's today like, the West German Rhineland area there, and then they kind of scattered across from there in different directions. But they had a specific cultural identity at their origin that made them that. Ashkenaz is for Germany. So it's basically saying like Sephard is Spain, and Ashkenaz is Germany. So it's like the names for a location originally. So it had a regional identity. Mizrahim wasn't originally something that you could point to with specific groups. It's sort of like applied from the outside. It's like an exonym for it. So like it basically means like Oriental Jews or like Asian, like the Jews of the Muslim world. So it's a way that the European Jews sort of collectively linked together all these different disparate communities. But Yemenite Jews and Moroccan Jews didn't have anything in common, really. They spoke very different languages. They had very different cultural traditions. But today they get kind of like squished together into this broader Mizrahim category, but it's not one that was originally theirs. They didn't come up with that. But Ashkenazim had a self-identification as Ashkenazim because of a common descent from these like German-speaking Jews in West Central Europe. So does that help? So that's like three of them. There's tons of other ones. So the Bene Israel community is South Asian Jews. The Beta Israel is Ethiopian Jews. The Kaifeng Jews are like, the Chinese Jewish community. There's a whole bunch of different groups there that all have like different designations that don't fit into that nice, simple tripartite category. But we tend to run into those the most, especially since they make up a majority of the Israeli population.
And when you nation location, you're speaking more in terms of a broad identity.
Nations aren't places. Nations aren't countries. A country is as a state that has sovereign control of land. So that's where like land comes in. But a nation is a group of people with something in common. So the Roma and Sinti peoples have a national identity, but they scatter all over Europe. They're in tons of different countries, but they are still Roma as a national identity. That's their national identity. It's not bounded necessarily. Nations often have a memory of a romantic homeland, whether they're there or not. So that can apply to the Roma. It can apply to like Jews in exile. So like pre, state of Israel or whatever you want to, if you want to think of it that way. But Jews had a history coming from a particular location, but they didn't live there. They lived all over the place. But they still had a sense of self as Jews that made them a nation. So it's not a place. We have to somehow completely decouple this sense of like the Israeli state identity and Jews as a group, because they're different things.
That all makes like complete sense to me that you've explained it that way. I feel like when we're having these discussions, it's almost like a gotcha, right? Like, oh yes, like Jewish being an ethnicity, therefore Israel has the right to exist and we have the right to create this state from the nation.
Yeah, I mean, I get how people will use that, but it's just as problematic as delegitimizing the
Yeah,
identity, because there's no necessary connection between those two things. If Israel had never come into existence, Jews would still be a people.
absolutely.
I think some of that framing is as a result of language conflation that is being pushed by Zionism.
It
Am I?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's several features. First, there's the common conflation between nation, state, and country. We often mix these words up, and popular culture does all the time. They squishes them together. So that gets super, super confusing already. Then Zionists have consciously conflated Jewish identity and Zionism, and have cultivated a connection to Jewish communities all around the world, trying to make them identify with the state in order to provide legitimacy to that state project that was originally quite controversial among Jews. And they've been partially successful in that. So it's created problems internally within the Jewish community around the world about how it relates to the concept of Israel. And then there's the whole question of, more than about a century and a half of settler colonialism and the impact on Palestinians and on the wider like Muslim world and Arab world. So there's oftentimes a temptation to delegitimize Jewish identity as a way of breaking the claims that Jews make to that homeland, trying to like show that that's somehow fraudulent. And they're actually two different things. You can criticize the policies in creating the state. You can criticize their own understanding of history without saying that they're not Jews or the Jews aren't a people. But there's a tendency to do that, to kind of like squish it together. And there's a lot of things we have to, in the same way that we have to separate Zionist from Jew, we also have to, there's a project that I think a lot of you guys might be aware of, but in the US and in Israel, there was a tendency to squish Palestinian and Arab together and make them the same thing. Oh, Palestinians are just Arabs. They're like, there's tons of other Arab countries they can go to. Why don't they just go to Morocco or something? But that makes no sense, because Palestinian culture and Moroccan culture are very different. They're different cultures. They're different nations. But they squished them together for political reasons to delegitimize the Palestinian identity. And while we have had to like break out of that and say, yes, Palestinians are a real people with a real history and culture, the same is true for Jews all around the world. They did have a pre-existing identity that doesn't need to be caught up in all the bullshit around Israel.
That's where I wanted to go next, because I think that that's also somewhere a lot of people tend to argue from, and they don't realize that they're conflating those things, of the conflation between being Muslim, being Arab, and being Palestinian. I mean, I try my best whenever I can, and I think even my language is deeply flawed when I do it, of consistently trying to make sure I talk about Palestinians as a group that are seeking a national identity as opposed to being an ethnic group. Because
Right.
I think,
And
yeah, go ahead.
technically, like, Palestinians don't have to be Arab or Muslim. There's several religions present there. So what about all the different sects of Christianity that exist there, or the Samaritan population? The Samaritans are also Palestinian. And then what about a lot of the different populations that moved there a long time ago? So you've got like the Circassian population that fled there because of the genocide in Russia, or like the Bosnians that were settled there in the Ottoman period. So, you know, they're not Arab in the same sense, you know, but they're still Palestinian because they have roots there. They've been there for a long time. And we can understand, Armenians too. We can understand those Armenians as Palestinians because they grew up in Palestine. They can have a Palestinian political identity, but still be Armenian as well. So there's like there's a lot of hybrid identities that can exist here, and we tend to leave a lot of that nuance out. There's a real tendency to conflate like Muslim, Palestinian, and Arab, and we should not.
So Liam, this is what we always say, right? So we always tell that many tribes went through the region, and yes, the whole region was Arabized, and so people take it out of context. You know, it's like when nation states, that is very conflicted. When one says nation states, if you bring the example of Italy, where you had Naples, and you had Rome, and you had Sicily, and during the 40s, most nation states were born. Now they all speak Italian, coming from the roots of the Romans.
Well, yeah, I actually use
Is
Italy
that similar enough?
I use Italy as a fun example in talking about how modern nation states and those political identities are all made up. They're all made up. I mean, yeah, people in Italy all speak Italian, but most of them learn it as a second language because they'll still at home, they'll grow up speaking Venetian or Sardinian, right? Friulian or Romagnol or Sicilian. I mean, there's tons of languages in Italy. It's extraordinarily diverse. The modern Italian language is artificial in the same way that modern Hebrew is. It's literally a made-up language based on the Tuscan language. So it's mostly similar to the Tuscan language with a few tweaks. But they created a standard Italian language, and then for political reasons, they call all the other languages of Italy dialects of Italian. They're not dialects. Venetian is just a descendant of the Latin spoken in the area, and so is Sicilian. And they're not mutually intelligible languages. They're as different as they are from like Portuguese. But Italianness was made up in the 19th century. Italia was a region going back into the Roman period, but it wasn't a national identity until a national project created one. So ultimately, the project that created Israel is the same dynamic that created Italy and Germany. And when people are, in hindsight now, and again, this is a complicated topic for people, especially when you're dealing with like a pro-Palestine movement, because Israel obviously did a lot of fucked up stuff over time here, and there's real history there. But we can't delegitimize Israeli political identity any more than we could delegitimize Italian identity, because it's the same process in both places. I mean, if you're going to say if you're going to say Israel isn't real, and a lot of people do that, like is not real or whatever, they have all kinds of like funky shit there, or they attack the identity there. I mean, if you're going to do that, but not say that Italians are fake or Germans are fake, it's you're doing it for political or racist reasons. At the end of the day, some people have been there, thinking with that identity for over a century now, and they've created an identity for themselves. There are problematic parts of their political ideology that we have to attack. We have to attack the racist elements of Israeli state structure and the ideology that supports it. But the identity as a self, like feeling that you are like Israeli Jewish or something, they're born that way. You can't delegitimize that without, in essence, being a racist. And when we don't do it consistently, it's very problematic. So Italy's a great example there, because it's just as fake as Israel is. We're not fake.
So we just tell them as tribes, the Syrians, Armenians, you name it, they were Palestinians prior to your state, And
what
have a hard time.
Syrian or Lebanese? I mean, most of these countries are quite recent too. Lebanon wasn't a thing. The Mount Lebanon area was tied to a specific Maronite culture living in a specific small subset of what became Lebanon. Right. Lebanese as a political identity is a modern development in
Right.
that sense, just as fake or real as Israeli identity.
It's crazy
I
because I
heard
used to have an
something.
idea.
Sorry, I heard something interesting today that I hadn't heard before. So there was an Australian that came on, and he said, "Well, I'm a Zionist, right? I consider myself a Zionist, but I believe that Jewish people in Australia, like they should have their own state in Australia. Jewish people in Turkey, they should have their own state in Turkey. I've never heard it before, and I heard it today, and I was pondering it, and I just was thinking, well, wouldn't that create more divisions between people if we went and did that?" In it was a kind of a wild take in my opinion. I just wanted to run it by you and see what you thought about it, or if it was any more common in your circles.
No, I I can't say I've even heard of that, but it makes sense in the sense that there's a lot of, I mean, weird ethnic separatist movements everywhere. But at the end of the day, there's no logical reason to separate people inside individual countries. At the end of the day, countries are all bullshit. They're all just made up. I mean, it's just you're drawing a line in the dirt and saying this is my dirt and that's your dirt, and on this side of the dirt we have a different identity, and on that side of the dirt you have a totally different one. I mean, at the
Hmm.
end of the day, all of that is bullshit. And continuing to divide people up into smaller and smaller units, all it does is it creates more conflict. It creates racism. It's nationalism at the end of the day is the most violent ideology in world history. It has killed more people easily. I mean, so many wars in the last 250 years are down to nationalism that it's just it boggles the mind. So many elements of the settler colonial projects and imperialism and all the tons of like racist policies in there, all the world wars, like tons of genocides or G-sides, or I don't know what I'm supposed to say with that one, but tons and tons of these things are directly caused by nationalism, about the sense of like creating an in-group and an out-group, of othering people. I don't think this is healthy for any group to do so.
Hmm.
And the longer term trend for Jews always has been to partially assimilate everywhere they went, to maintain some elements of a Jewish identity, because again, Judaism, not historically a religion, it's a set of ritual practices, so how you name your kids and what, rules you follow in your household and how you cook and things like that. But they always partly assimilated. They intermarried with people, they adopted local languages. So there are a whole bunch of South Asian languages that are like Judeo-Marathi, or
Hmm.
Judeo-Berber and Judeo-Arabic. We talked about Ladino and Yiddish a moment ago, right? I mean, obviously, Spanish and German are not originally Jewish languages, but they were adopted, and they became Jewish languages when they were written in a Jewish script and had some loan words in from Hebrew, and it became a distinct thing. But they're always partly blending in with the people around them, always, always, always. And I think that's a healthier tradition anyway, is to bring people together, not cut them apart into separate little states.
Um, it is heading towards a very dangerous territory, but also because I think it is lending weight to some destructive discussions. That's why I want to try and make sure that we decouple a lot of the um, understanding of what means what, and also trying
Yeah.
to get to the root cause of it. One thing I wanted to go back on was the idea of national identity. So, from what Kim was saying, when he said, that there are people who are Jewish and Australian and wanted a separate state, or automatically alarm bells started ringing, because I put that akin to a lot of white kind of nationalist kind of, well, not really nationalist, but racist ideas, because there is
White,
that, as
white
you said.
separatist movements, yeah.
Exactly, yes. And that can be deeply problematic. So I think that it's important for us to try and hear what's being said. Are
Mhm.
people being excluded from their Jewish identity because of their race, because they belong to a particular group of people? So being Arab, for example,
Mhm.
and by say Arab, I mean Arab speaking, but also Jewish, as in you practice Judaism. I think is that the way that we're going with this. Um, so unless we are willing to try and deconstruct in our minds what we understand of these terms, it becomes difficult for us to have these discussions. But
Right.
I also want to talk about this also from the Arab perspective, because um, being like Somali myself, my identity is constantly being shifted depending on who I'm talking to. So when I lived in Dubai, for example, people would be like, "Oh no, you're Arab because you're Somali because you belong to the Arab League," and I'm like, "Not really. I'm Somali because that's my ethnic identity, even though I've never lived in Somalia. I wasn't born in Somalia. That is still my ethnic identity. That being
Right.
said, I do understand the connection with the Arab world, but I choose to identify as black. Some Somali people do choose to identify as Arab. Where I struggle is when uh, that there is a level of exclusion. So again, being Muslim, I will have times my um, religious affiliation being questioned because of where I come from. And I think that that's maybe some of what's happening that is very dangerous. And I don't know how people can have a sense of national pride. So again, I am British. That's my citizenship. Um, so I'm proud of being British, but at the same time, I say that with hesitation because of those issues. So I don't know how we reconcile all of that in a healthy way, essentially.
Yeah, that honestly gets to the problem of nationalism as a whole, because nationalism, again, always it functions by creating in groups and out groups, by creating closed definitions. And within complex states, I mean, states are always pretty diverse. I mean, you'd have to have like a micro state to have it relatively homogenous. I mean, even tiny places like Monaco are diverse. So what does it then mean to be, monegasque? What are the elements that are necessary there? And for a lot of people, it takes on like, well, there are plenty of people. I don't know. You ask the English Defense League, and they're going to say, well, you got to be white or something, And but do you? I mean, so it gets really, really complicated and fraught in a lot of ways. And there was a question I saw in the chat a moment ago that's super relevant to this. Someone said, then could Islam also be an ethnicity? And the problem here is that you've actually seen attempts to do that several times across the 20th century and beyond. They're largely because of the importation of certain nationalist trends into the Muslim world. And if you think of groups like Daesh or ISIL, whatever you want to call it, like that T group that was in Iraq and Syria for a while. Pardon me. The best way to understand them is as an Islamic nationalist movement, because their goal was to create a state for Muslims, like a Muslim state, and like linking together into creating like a kind of single caliphate. And they attacked minorities in their control that had lived side by side with Muslims and Arabs for millennia, for millennium. I mean, think about the attacks on the Yazidis in the mountains, or they actually tried forcibly converting the Christians of the Nineveh Plain. And like that's literally a violation of Quranic precepts, like attacking Christians. But they did it because it was a national movement. It was a way of reconceiving of Islam. So doing so can be actually very, very problematic. I mean, the more we build up these conflicting identities when they have a kind of exclusionary element to them, they can be very, very toxic at the end of the day. So trying to find a way to navigate the human need for some kind of tribal identity with living around other people without attacking them, that's the real challenge for us. Because when humans have always had different identities, we've always had various tribes living close together, people speaking different languages, having different religions, and in countless polities, like countless states through human history, They've lived together without any real problems. When we take elements of our personal identity and we make them political, we introduce that problem. And that's the problem with ISIL, was that they turned their identity as Muslims into a political identity. And that tied it to power, and power tied it to violence. At the end of the day, that's a very similar dynamic to what you see happening in Israel, because you've taken a Jewish identity and tied it to a state and to power structures that then have the power of a state to exclude other people. It's one thing for me to say, like, hey, I'm going to invite all my Jewish neighbors to a Seder or something, but I'm not going to invite all the Christians to the Seder. That's a specific ritual practice for a particular community, but it has nothing to do with power relations. If I was going to instead say, like, hey, I'm going to, like, ethnically cleanse all the Christians from my street, that's something a state can do that individuals can't. The power structures are the problem. So again, very similar. So the question somebody asked about Islam, yeah, it can be, but when people try to do it's very problematic. Anytime you're tying these things together to power is a problem. And again, nationalism is about taking your identity and trying to create a state, and then have a state that advances your interests. And when you have that, when you take your identity and make it into a nationalism, it's inherently problematic in the world.
I think the phrase is always, oh no, but there are so many, and again, it's used interchangeably, Arab or Muslim countries. Why can't the Palestinians go there? Um, so I think that
It's not their identity.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, the borders are a different problem there. I mean, and there's another interesting sort of conflation there, because the borders in most of the Arab world are pretty artificial. They're largely imposed from the outside, not exclusively, but almost all of them are. And within them, it's often a giant complex clusterfuck of different peoples. So the modern political identities are a little bit different from the local cultural identities, but there are still clear cultural differences between Egyptians as an ethnic group in the Nile Valley and, I don't know, people living in the, in like Tangier or something. They don't understand each other. They speak a different language. They have a different culture. They'll speak a form of Arabic, but not a mutually intelligible one, and not one with a common history or culture. Cultures tend to emerge in specific areas at specific times. They can become kind of transnational, like the Roma or Jews or whatever, but they have an origin, and that's sort of important to it, and they hold to certain traditions and histories. Palestinians are tied to their history in a specific location. So they have no shared history with Moroccans. It's nonsensical. And I love that you brought up like the Somali there, because like places like Somalia or Comoros are part of the Arab League because of historical like trade ties, cultural exchange. But Somalis generally don't speak Arabic. It's pretty uncommon. So they're not Arabs in the sense of a personal identity usually, but they're Arabs oftentimes in a political identity because of those links and because of a desire to be part of that world. So it gets very muddled in places.
So, what would you? I was just gonna say, like, what would you say is the best way to avoid a state becoming nationalistic? Is it just secularism? Is it we all come together and say we don't want to adopt any cookie cutter identity that we would define as us?
That's the core, because for most of the last 5,000 years since territorial states really rose in the first place, because humans didn't always have states. I mean, our species has been bopping around for somewhere between 250,000 and 300,000 years, and we've only had states for 5,000 years. But states, until you get to the 19th century, weren't nation states. The nation state is a specific development in Europe that says that a particular group of people, a particular in-group, should have a country and power to then impose its vision and advantage it as an ethnic group above all others. That's not how countries have worked. So, say France, right, is a modern nationalist state and has been imposing a particular vision on people, but France was also a country in the 8th century. But in 8th century France, what made France France was borders and laws and a king, not a common identity. So people speaking Picard and Gascon couldn't understand each other. They had completely different local cultures, but both lived in the same state. We can have a political identity that doesn't have a nationalism because that was actually the norm for thousands of years. But we fell into this idea of nation states because of the spreads of European empires in the 19th and 20th century. And we now have to find a way out of that trap because that idea has been incredibly destructive. Hi.
Absolutely.
Tricky.
Sorry.
You
the
strike me
last-
as an anarchist, Professor. Is
What?
you strike me as an anarchist? Would that be an accurate descriptor? I can respect and appreciate that.
I don't naturally trust power hierarchies. I think we have to view all of them with skepticism. I'm a very pragmatic anarchist. You have to work within what constraints you have, but my principles are always to oppose the application of power to other people. I have no right to tell other people what to do. I can talk to them, I can suggest things, but I have no right to control somebody else, and I don't think anybody should.
I agree.
Could I perhaps segue this into the distrust of organizations and governments and bring up what happened today with the UN?
I missed the first few words of the
anyone-
sentence.
Oh, I was, you were talking about distrust of power.
Oh, yeah, distrust of power, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. I mean, so then distrusting the UN or what? Okay, I see where you're going.
is everyone okay with that on the panel? I know there are 2 people who have not been able to talk at all yet.
Oh, sorry. Is that Lisa?
It's Lisa, yes.
Oh, yeah. No. I think it's a good idea to now go back to our order. So yes, please. So I'll go you.
Well, you forgot an order. Danny is asking books on anarchy. Send me a direct message and we can talk about your specific interest. There's 2.5 shelves right here behind me just on anarchy. There's as many types of anarchy as there are anarchists. So I wouldn't know what to recommend offhand without knowing more about what you'd want.
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. I'll go down the line after that.
Thank you so much. So my question is, do you see any hope that just in the history of UN and the, because I feel like they talk a lot, the UN. Do you see any hope that they will help the situation in Gaza?
No.
Okay.
Not beyond what they already do. So like with the relief works and whatnot, bringing in aid, things like that. So it does provide certain international frameworks for raising cash and providing certain essential services like, food, medicine, basic care, reconstruction efforts, also cultural preservation stuff, things like that. The UN's good for things like that. But essentially the League of Nations and the UN are not that different. The League of Nations was just all they could do is talk. They had no way of enforcing anything. They gave the UN some enforcement mechanisms with the Security Council, but only if a handful of major imperial powers all agree with each other, which means at the end of the day, in terms of its power application, it's just a club for imperialists. Beyond that, outside of those 5, it's mainly just a club for talking through issues and sharing and exchanging ideas, and then for raising money and contributing to like relief efforts and cultural preservation, all kinds of crap like that. So the UN does do plenty of really good things in the world, but it has no real ability to stop conflicts.
Okay, so a lot of people believe that this is what's happening. There is on Friday, this vote is going to the Security Council. There are 15 members of that. They need 9 people to vote to move forward with the ceasefire. Most of the people that are currently on that committee, the countries that voted against the ceasefire today, UK abstained and obviously the US. So they do have 10, or no, they have more than 10 that voted this way today, right? Demanding the ceasefire or whatever. So
General Assembly one?
what was that?
In the General Assembly resolution, right?
Yes. So then it goes to the Security Council, which is on the 15th, Friday. So that looks stacked towards the ceasefire. And, they say, obviously, you know more than me. They say that there's these blue helmets. They're going to enforce the ceasefire. So I'm just saying, is there going to be fucking anyone in there doing anything? Even if they totally say it went through the General Assembly, it went through the Security Council, we're all for this.
If every single member of the UN except for the US said to do it, it still wouldn't happen. Because the General Assembly resolutions are non-binding. It doesn't matter. Every single General Assembly member except for one could vote, and it wouldn't change anything at all. In the Security Council, there are 15 that are seated on there, but 10 of them rotate among the members. It just bounces around with this complex mathematical formula. But 5 of them are permanent members that are always on there, and all 5 permanent members have a veto. All it takes is one of them. Like the Korean conflict, the Korean War, was only a UN police action because the Soviet delegation was boycotting the UN that week. They just weren't there. Otherwise, they would have vetoed it, and it wouldn't have been a UN policing action. It would have been like, I don't know, the US would have just gone to war or something. The only time you can actually have blue helmets is if there is agreement among all 5 of the permanent members. At the end of the day, those 5 are the only ones that have any real say in terms of enforcement mechanisms, whether there are economic sanctions, whether there are blue helmets on the ground. Those 2 things can only happen with unanimity here.
So
matter for that.
So from what I understand, though, at the Security Council, I'm not saying, I'm trying to hang on to something like, so from what I understand, there's no veto that could happen at the Security Council. I realize I sound like I'm grasping at straws right here. I am, but
I feel you on a reason for doing it, and I hate being the bearer of bad news sometimes, but it just, I don't know. I can be fairly blunt about things too, so I'm sorry for that.
No, we want that.
But in any Security Council vote, anytime it comes up, the 5 permanent members always can exercise their veto. There's no way to prevent that. So this, and I was trying to warn people about the 377 stuff when everyone was talking about it and everyone getting their hopes up about it. And I totally get why we'd want to get our hopes up. I feel you. I really do. But all that can do is provide moral weight. That's all it's intended to do. And what they were hoping with that resolution when it was originally put in place was that the moral force of most countries voting for something would allow for individual member states to act on their own to intervene. That's the goal behind that original resolution that was invoked for the vote today. But it would still be illegal because technically wars are illegal without Security Council authorization. Granted, not really enforceable. Obviously, the U.S. constantly flouts that. But if, say, I don't know, Egypt was dumb enough to try and intervene militarily, the U.S. could literally attack Egypt because it would have been acting without Security Council authorization, even with this kind of vote in place, because General Assembly resolutions have they're not binding in any way in international law. They're only providing a moral argument. The only way you can get authorizations for any intervention here is through the Security Council.
So are you saying it's not true that a veto can't be, because this is what I was told today, and I believe it's what I read, is that with the Security Council, you can't veto that decision. You can veto it in the General Assembly, but not in the Security Council. I don't know.
The General Assembly resolution is a separate thing from
Right.
what happens in the Security Council.
Right.
So the General Assembly resolution stands. It is what it is. That
Okay.
can't be touched. But if the same issue is then also raised in Security Council again and comes to a vote there, yeah, the members can veto it. There's nothing in the laws that stop them from doing that.
Okay.
So the General Assembly doesn't, as far as like the charter for the UN, kind of like its constitution, the General Assembly doesn't have the ability to override the Security Council. That was by design. It's the only way you got the major powers to all agree to be on it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the U.S. would never. I mean, the U.S. essentially spearheaded the creation of the UN because it would actually secure our interests in the world. If it could possibly contradict our interests, we wouldn't have done it.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'm going to read those books that were my first question that you recommended. Thank you so much.
Take a look and see if anything seems appealing to you. Yeah.
Well, now I got to read those books, right? Thanks so much.
Professor, it was fair to say that those 5 UN security nations, they were nuclear powers already. So it's like power respects power.
They actually weren't. When the UN was created, only one country was a nuclear power.
The US, right?
The only one. We shared the technology with the UK in the years afterwards, but France had to go nuclear on its own. The Soviets had to go nuclear on their own, and the Chinese didn't pull that off until the 60s.
Right.
So
Mostly
no,
right.
they all agreed to it, even though there was only one nuclear power, largely because of the way it would work. So the Soviets are fine. They didn't need to have the bomb to be on it because they could veto any action. So they still felt safe. They still felt they could protect their interests as well.
Interesting.
Do you want to add something on this particular point before we move on, or?
Oh, I would like to reply to
Yeah, I'll let
Lisa
you go.
because-
I've gone before.
Go ahead.
Oh, because I just feel like, she feels like maybe defeated or something because of what's going on. But in reality, it's opening everybody's eyes about how widespread the corruption is. And we're going to keep fighting. It's going to keep, injustice will keep spreading. And then we're going to be realizing we need to have a revolution, globally. That these powers are affecting everybody and oppressing everybody. And that's what the resistance, yes, I love him. And that's the resistance is about. Anytime there's an oppressor, we all have to go against them.
Mama, I just wanted to say that I've said this to the professor before. The only way things are going to work and change on the ground is through major disruption. When police cars are flipped over, buildings are torn on fire, sort of like the civil rights era. That's when politicians really get together and say, hey, what the hell is going on?
In Minecraft. In Minecraft.
Absolutely.
In Minecraft.
We should be flipping over police cars and burning down police stations in Minecraft.
Hey,
Right?
Yeah. So everything people are doing is not in vain. It's going to get vetoed, but it's not in vain because it's opening people's eyes.
Yeah. And that is it's a significant factor in building revolutionary movements. You have to actually, hey, get out of that. You have to spread ideas. You have to do that whole consciousness building. You have to give people a sense that change is possible and change should go in a particular direction. Otherwise, it can't happen. So this is important. What's happening here absolutely is important, but the UN can't fix this shit for us. It's
They
not
created this shit. They're part of the same, all part of the same team.
Yeah, the UN was again created by great powers to secure great power interests. So it's a tool of the same hierarchical structures that we have to tear down at the end of the day. But we do need something that eventually does bring countries together in a way that really does build consensus. We can't do that in the current architecture because a handful of countries were too powerful and had the ability to prevent that. We need something much more equitable. as a replacement for it. In the same way that the UN was an improvement over the League of Nations, we do at some point need a better one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
because
mean,
even if there wasn't a veto, Israel already said that they would not agree to the ceasefire and they would break it, and they always do. So
So
that's why we need something
it would have to be
bigger.
imposed by force, and no one's willing to do that.
Liam, I just wanted to clarify the opinions that you've given, because I have read, like I said, I've gone through all your posts, and I encourage everybody to go through the posts and really kind of get up to speed. But you were very clear on the concept of, militancy and violence against property as opposed to violence against
Oh,
people and being,
that's
because
the
otherwise it
suffragette.
becomes otherwise it's ineffective and starts to work backwards. So in this particular situation, we've had our major violence event, and now continued militancy and pressure can bring upon change, but if it gets too out of hand, it could work the other way.
Yeah, the danger always and this is a what you can do in building movements like that. Direct action is useful, but you have to have a large enough movement to begin with. So just I don't know, picking an important historical example, or one that's very important for me because I'm an old wobbly. Um, so the IWW, I got a whole bunch of books on the wobblies here. They engaged in direct action. They were a militant union, but they didn't have a large enough member base, and there weren't enough people that supported the idea of industrial unionism in that way. So they were pretty easy to crush under the iron heel. The state destroyed them. And the same thing can happen to tons of movements here. It's the same thing that'll happen to tons of civil rights groups. I mean, look at what they did to the Panthers. Look at the way that they threw tons of the BLM movement even into disrepute, even though it was almost entirely nonviolent because there was some property damage. It's really, and that was honestly hilarious because there was almost 2,000 protests, something like that, scattered all over the country, carrying on for an entire year. And it was less property damage than 4 days in the LA riots of 92. I mean, just babies at some point, complaining oh my God, they're burning down cities everywhere. They're burning down cities. No, they're not. No city burned down. But either way, you have rhetorical tools you can use, and you have literal violence that you can use against groups. In order to actually engage in real, effective direct action for change, you need that consciousness building. You need a mass movement. If there were millions of us marching in the street, the state wouldn't do anything about it. That's where you can see a potential for real revolution. Just a very short kind of I don't know, think about some places where revolutions have happened, right? Look at the Iranian Revolution, for example. It wasn't a single faction; it was a whole bunch of different factions. Communists and Bazaris and ethnic separatist groups and student groups and liberals, all kinds of groups, all came together because they all hated the Shah. And at the end of the day, the state did open fire on them, but the numbers kept going up because it was actually popular by that point. They'd spent decades building up a movement around this. And when you've got 2 million people in the streets, eventually the army is just going to stop shooting because they're not going to massacre 1 million people. No one's going to do that. So those soldiers just turned around, shot their officers, and joined the protests. And that was it. At that point, the government fell. You need the numbers. When you have the numbers, you can get real change. If it's just a few thousand people here and there in a pro-Palestine protest, no one's going to care. Most of the country ignores you. When you've got millions of people marching in cities all over the world, then you have the potential for something. So there's a direct action, yes, but take some lessons from history and do it smartly. Don't push before you can.
I want to press on. Sorry,
Oh yeah,
Mummy.
go ahead.
Go ahead. I want to press on this particular point because I think something is happening, and I want to go back to what you said about the moral side of what's happening with regards to the UN. Um, I feel like at the moment we are at the precipice of something going on with possibly either people waking up and organizing or giving into a level of apathy that is going to let widespread nationalism and fascism take hold. Um, I see that some of the language that is being attempted to be suppressed. So take, for example, the phrase, from the river to the sea, for example, or the move to challenge universities on, how they take action against anti-Semitism. Yes, there is definitely an issue that's going on right now where hate is elevated because of what's happening with nationalism. But I think that um, there is a slight awareness that's going on, not enough, I don't think, with the general public in people at least waking up to the idea that the systems that we have in place are not working for us. Where I think we're failing is a lack of understanding. There seems to be a very surface level, but not enough that people are able to now try and organize effectively. And I was wondering if you see that. Again, I'm trying to grasp to anything to try and hold on to what we need to hold on to.
Yeah, I mean, organization is key, and I haven't seen yet enough sign of that. So for me, and please don't let this burst anyone's bubble or hope or anything like that, but for me, I'm at the I'll believe it when I start seeing signs of it kind of stage, and I don't yet. Um, as far as like the UN and its moral role, I mean, look back at its history. I mean, for decades, the UN General Assembly has been voting against Israel, and oftentimes almost unanimously, and it's never had a damn bit of effect on anything at all. There's a lot of people who have understood the difficulty of the situation for a long time, but actually mobilizing people to do something. So I'm waiting to see what happens with this general strike stuff, because general strikes, especially in the U.S., we haven't had anything like that in quite a long time. The union movement in the U.S. has been in decline for a long time, and there's only like the very beginnings of a resurgence now, but we fell so far. We fell below the level of union membership from like before the Great Depression. It had gotten pathetic. So any resurrection is starting from like ground zero. I don't see enough of the sense of like broader social solidarity anymore. I mean, I'll just give you like a local example here from like the LA area, right? You go back to the 1940s. So there's already the very beginnings of a kind of like, the Cold War-ish kind of clamp down, anti-communist kind of shit, but people still broadly understood the unions were good and were going to help people. So when a bunch of Disney animators went on strike, tons of people who were members of other unions or not union members at all joined in and supported them. They brought them food, they joined the picket lines, they helped out. There was a sense of broader social solidarity where people understood that the bosses are fucking us and we have to stand together. In the last, 60 some years, so many millions and millions of Americans have been convinced that the bosses are actually your friend and that the businesses are actually your friend and we should be grateful to have a job. You don't have the same sense of social solidarity that you had before. And I see that really strongly in issues like this, even more so, not less so, than the question of labor because of the Cold War legacy there. There's a weird racist kind of component here. There's a culture wars angle. So the kind of pro-Palestine stuff, I mean, it fails for so many people. I mean, how many of the like the liberal types out there are like your Bill Maher's who are conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism? It's just normal for tons of people. The pro-Palestine movement seems larger than it actually is because mediums like this bring us together and allow us to interact with each other. And so it amplifies our voice in a sense. I think our actual numbers in the overall population are quite small because we have a huge barrier to get over in addressing the kind of imperialism and cultural racism that keeps people from having a sense of solidarity, the sense that an injury to one is an injury to all. Again, I'm an old wobbly, right? So my sense of like, I have to stand up for Palestinians because there's injustice. They're being oppressed. It doesn't matter that I'm not Palestinian. It has fuck all to do with it. I mean, because somebody is being hurt, I should speak up. Most people don't feel that way. That's not common. And I think we have to get back to where that is. You used to see that in this country a lot, and there's still elements of it in tons of other countries too, but it's been in decline in much of the world for a long time. You know, you go back to late 19th, early 20th century, there was a lot of ways to bring people together. And hell, one of the reasons Jim Crow was created was because there was a lot of solidarity among working class whites and working class blacks in the South. And they were joining the progressive movement and the People's Party, and they were joining together to fight back against the bosses and the power structures. So enter much more overt systemic racism in order to divide people along those lines. That legacy over the last century has fucked people's heads and stopped them from seeing the humanity of other people. And I think that that is our single biggest struggle. I mean, I understand there's all the short run issues. We all want to, we all care about what's happening in Palestine. I get that, but we have a huge long term battle. And if you guys are interested in this, if you really do care about the Palestine issue, stay tuned long term, stay involved, start building a global justice movement, because that's what we need. If you really want an effect on these, if you want the tools to be able to stop future conflicts, we have to start building that now and keep it together all the time, because that's what we've lost and that's what we need to get back.
I wanted to ask, since so long, like, I feel like it's relevant to kind of what you're talking about. Because I'm like part Native American, but I don't know a lot about the history because I was adopted. And like, what kind of propaganda were they doing to like make people accept the idea of like the G side, and it just it's like we kind of think that like back in the day people were more religious and more modest and all this stuff, but like I just can't wrap my head around like how it was accepted, and
So which one? I think I missed something at the beginning of that. Like which
like
G's?
what they did here in America to the
Oh,
Native
you. Oh,
Americans. Yeah, yeah. Like,
well,
were they doing propaganda to people that or brainwashing people, and like how was it accepted, you know?
it's a matter of identities, of building identities that exclude things. So a lot of it started off with cultural chauvinism and religious chauvinism. So when people showed up here, they attacked the indigenous because they weren't Christian, or they didn't have European culture. They didn't. You don't farm the way we do. What's wrong with you? You must be dumb somehow. So they they dehumanized them in a sense. They made them inferior or savage. And never mind that actually they contributed a bunch of ideas to the European Enlightenment. There was tons of interesting cultures here present already that were well adapted to their own environments. But it was in the interests of power to construct our identities around excluding them, around saying that they are savage, they're inferior. And that is what kind of allowed it. It's hard to sympathize with the people when you're told that they're savages. This is why the Zionists have always referred to the Palestinians as savages, as backward people. They still try to play that same kind of civilizational politics, like the whole like civilizing mission kind of bullshit from from 19th century Europe. It's a drug for a lot of people because it makes somebody feel better than somebody else. It's the same thing that worked with creating Jim Crow and breaking that solidarity in the late 19th century. Was you give people a sense that they're better than somebody else, and it doesn't matter if they're still just as disadvantaged. They're still going to get their clock cleaned by all the same elites, all the same power structures. They're still disadvantaged economically and in every possible social way, but they feel like they're better than those people. And that gives them some kind of pride. That's how they got people to hate on the Amerindians. That's how they got people to hate on Black Americans. That's how they got people to hate on later waves of like East Asian immigrants and Muslim immigrants. It's always the sense of creating an outgroup that privileges a particular identity.
So I've this gets a little conspiratorial, but it is with backing that we've seen in recent history. I just worry about the implications of social media, and you touched on it a little bit regarding like microchasms. Like we feel like we're a bigger group because we tend to connect with people via Facebook or Instagram, and that's usually due to the algorithm, like connecting like-minded individuals.
Right.
And we've also seen, I forget what company Trump commissioned when he got elected, but it was a company that used
Cambridge
Facebook and
Analytica.
yes, Cambridge Analytica. Uh, they and we can see examples of Facebook pretty much what do you call it? Fixing elections, I guess would be the best word for it. They can put ad campaigns in certain places, and for some places around the world, Facebook is synonymous with the word internet, because Facebook provides free internet access for some users around the world. So for a lot of people, Facebook is the internet. Um, so I just worry about our ability to organize and get people all on the same page when we are a victim to these algorithms, or subject, I guess, to these algorithms that can essentially mold our understanding of the world.
I made a short clip on something kind of related to this not too long ago, arguing that to organize for social change, some of it can start with the internet. You can meet people this way, you can find people, but what we need to do is we have to find the people in our area and organize in person as well. And you use a sense of both. You use the internet to create wider confederacies, so linking together different groups of people, different cells that are working on things. But you have to act in a local level. We have to meet in person. We have to organize and plan things physically, and we have to do things in the real world. A lot of this is just if it goes beyond the educational aspects, so the mix of like agitprop or like, working class education, that kind of crap, ultimately what groups, things like this are about, or meeting people in the first place to kind of like create an initial network. And if it instead stays there, if it stays as this is our activism, we're all going to interact digitally and we're going to create a website and we're going to do this or that. I mean, again, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but that's not going to change the world. It's never how it works. You have to actually organize in the real world. And I'm not saying that because I'm like just an old fuddy-duddy. I'm saying that because that's how change has always happened. There's tons and tons of shit where you see people organizing this way over the last 15 years, and it's done fuck all. It can't actually change the world at the end of the day. What changes it is physical acts. And that requires organizing in person. And the best way to build larger networks. So we first meet some people. We find a local affinity group. We find the people. Who are the people in my area that have this thing in common with me? Oh, you're pro-Palestine. Okay, cool. Let's get together. And we meet. Now, as a group, we start talking to our neighbors. And we sit down and have conversations with them. We have conversations in the local bars or whatever. We meet people, we talk to them, we engage them, we confront them with issues, and we try to actually learn how to sway people who don't agree with you. You find a way to actually engage. And this is a lost art for a lot of people. We've become much more balkanized in the last 70 years. It's not just the internet that's done this. A lot of the whole suburbia push was intentionally to break social bonds and push people further and further apart. We've lost the ability to have really good substantive conversations with people who disagree with us, who come from a different moral or cultural framing. And to actually sit down with them and, help them to see your side, to help them to understand where you're coming from and change their views over time. If we don't engage with people, we lose. Because this is how nationalist groups work. This is how they built up. They didn't rise on the internet. They didn't stay in groups like this. They're physical. This is how Zionism worked. It was physical. How did you end up with this is a mystery still to a lot of people, like how the state of Israel was created in the first place and why did it just steamroll the Palestinians? Well, it's because they were organized. It's because you go back into the 1880s and 1870s, they were creating like these Chovevit Zion groups, these lovers of Zion groups, these physical affinity groups where people got together and they taught each other basic skills. We're going to teach each other how to farm. This is a hoe. This is a shovel. You stick it in the dirt. And this is how a gun works and everything else, like teaching practical skills on how to run a community. By the time they got there, they started building institutions. At the time that they were ready to become a state in the 1930s. All you would have had to do is change the names and create state institutions. They had everything they needed for a functioning country before they had a country, because they organized physically. That's how you get real change. We have to get back to that skill as well. I think the internet is only a starting point. And once you get that, from there, it becomes a way to link groups together in different areas, because transnational change is beautiful. When you can get if you can get simultaneous protests or strikes in dozens of cities around the world, yeah, that's how the internet's super useful. But you only get the strike in the first place with the physical organizing. That's why I think a general strike call is going to fail. I mean, that's my reading here from looking at tons of places where people have tried to do this in the last 20 years. They never take off. Most people have never even heard of it. The actual groundwork to build a movement around it hasn't happened. It's just things circulating in affinity groups on the internet. So it's only going to be the people who are already in the know. That's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
We need to build those local groups here. We need to spread out and essentially, conquer the world in our immediate environment. That's how you can get an actual general strike to happen.
A doctor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hold on, Danny.
Chats,
I'm going to
there's
go
tons
to
of
Stephen and
places
then I'll
where
come
people
to you
meet.
if you don't mind. Stephen, did you have a question? I don't know if he's still with us. There we are.
I'm here. Yeah, no, I'll be pretty brief. I was on here yesterday, and as I've said to the group and to Doctor before, I really am a student on some level of TikTok, and before back in September, was looking at it and trying to understand its influence in my business aspects and how is this effective and XYZ. And but obviously, it's they're going to teach this stuff in college at some point. What happened here, and and how this particular piece of social media did help bring conversation out and move it towards the next step. And to your point, Doctor, I don't disagree with anything. I keep listening to that. I just and one of the ways that I did get myself uh, involved through this and tried to learn about it was listening to groups that were out there, and we all know that they can be insane and they can also be very helpful. And I started to pick out people within the individual groups that I found moderate and could have a conversation, and and that there was something that the conversation would be positive, fruitful, some level of moving, of being effective and moving forward. And it's interesting in that often I think the individuals kind of come to the same place if they've been putting in the same effort. And I would say when I started doing this, and only because Be Blessed is here will I use her name, she vocalized at exactly the same time I was coming to this, sort of epiphany. Like, I'm not going to waste my time with people, who just don't, they're just not ready to change, don't want to change, don't want to hear anything. And let's kind of focus our energies where we can actually be effective with folks and use effective language and dialogue and not debate and scream and yell about, in my perception, like, I don't want to hear about DNA anymore. I don't want to hear about, who was there first and, who's stronger, Tarzan or Superman or any of that kind of stuff. So, in that being said, since I first got to your groups, I felt like I need to get more people aware, but I didn't feel it was my job to do it to get them here. I would on larger groups where I might speak around you, use a point, basically say there's a historian and XYZ said this. And then people would, would come to me and say, who is that? And I might DM them, but I was kind of selective because I would hate to lose what you have here, but I also would love to see it grow and get more people. And I think one of the best opportunities for that is going to be on your break when you can come in at different times, because I go to share it and half of the people that I'd love to be here are asleep. And, and then I actually, at the end of yesterday's live, I saw some of those people, and they might have been for the first time, the ones that I'm drawn to. If I see they're in a group, I know I can go there and I'll get something out of it. And they were here. So, my guess, so just to get to my question, as opposed to a monologue, how comfortable are you with me perhaps what I something that I can do is be a little bit more aggressive in I like to share, like if I share a live and a little comment, one of you, it's not a live, but I'll share one of your posts and say, hey, this is what we were talking about today. Here, check it out. And 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 then perhaps and then I encourage them, hey, come on in, look, follow and look at the rest of the posts, etc. But I don't feel like it's my place to be active with your name and your live and all of that.
Okay, so that's really fair. So a couple of general points then. For me, just as a general point, again, I kind of take seriously being an anarchist, so I don't think of this as mine. I think of it as a communal space. I'm no one's leader. I'm not in charge of anything. I'm here to help out however I can and do whatever I can. As far as other people coming in, this has gotten me in trouble plenty of times in my life, I'll tell you, but I'm like I'm I'm shameless on a truly autistic level. I mean, I live up to the ASD that I have. I mean, I don't care. Like I will say what I'm going to say wherever I'm going to say it, and if it pisses people off, then it pisses people off, and I'm sorry, but that's my truth, and I'm going to say it. I'm not concerned with more people coming in. If people come in and they don't agree with things or that they create a problem or whatever, if they're toxic, then somebody can throw them out. That's a whole different issue. If somebody comes in and they're just being some antagonistic troll, then yeah, fuck them. We'll throw them out. But anybody can come here because anybody can grow and learn and change and contribute in a community. And I'm perfectly happy to see that grow as far as anybody wants it to go. So if you think somebody might get something out of it, by all means, bring them in.
All
Um,
right.
as far as people who like contributing regularly and hopping in and talking, that's nice. And it is good to have like some regulars that come in and have a nice conversation. And I get to know some people, and that's kind of cool too. But the thing about doing this as a regular thing instead of just like a lark, like honestly, I had no idea that this would be fun, that I would enjoy doing this. I worried that I would feel like I'm sitting here talking to myself in a room by myself, and it would feel really awkward and weird because I detest telephone calls for that reason. But I think the fact that I can sometimes see people helps a little bit, and there's more voices popping in, and there's also the text chat because I'm very word oriented. I think that helps a little bit to make it comfortable enough that this is actually fun. So even beyond the current crisis, I don't mind continuing to do this as long as people are interested in talking to me. So this can become just like a regular thing that I just keep on doing. And if it grows, then there's always still going to be opportunities for regulars to still come on because there's going to be enough meetings, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes sense. I sense there's going to always be a conflict to be discussed. And, even this will bring on more conversations, and we touch on it
Yeah.
all the time, that each individual country, even to make the world better, we have to deal with our own things at home. And, and the idea of being able to have historical perspective, from the entire world, that things are possible and this is how other people did it. And, and then even being able to get some historical context and cultural context in the place where you're actually trying to change things so that you're able to formulate, good ideas and strategies towards attaining those goals. But listen, thank you so much. And that's one of the things is I want to make sure, I almost feel protective that I don't want to see you get frustrated either, to where it's not fun for you anymore. And then, I think the resource here is too valuable. And thanks everybody. And I'll give my space up.
The only thing that's gonna like frustrate me is somebody's consciously trolling. If there's just some antagonistic asshole, I I can have a short fuse with people like that. I try to be patient, but if somebody's being an ass, I'm going to throw them out, or somebody in the moderators can throw them out, and that it's as easy as that.
It gets to where you
It's
can
not
spot
about
those
limiting
folks
the
in
room
20
to five.
seconds.
What was that?
I said it gets to where you can almost start spotting those folks within 20 seconds of them speaking,
Yeah.
and
Well,
detoxify the area. Anyway,
and it's
thanks
a
for
little
everything.
easier than in person. Like when you're organizing in person, you got to have pepper spray and and like your camera's handy and like there's always somebody that's got the baseball bat because you never know who the hell's going to show up. I've been at I've been at events with I mean with tons of groups before where I mean dudes in like literal SS shirts show up looking to start a fight.
Mm.
So you got to be ready for shit like that in the real world. Here we don't have to worry about it. Here we can just go boop and they're gone. So this is as safe a space as it gets as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, sir. Well, everybody have a great evening. I'm going to drop off. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm a little under the weather. So everybody have a great day, and hope to see you throughout the week. Take
Yeah,
care.
have a great night, and I'll definitely do some earlier in the day.
Great.
Thanks, Stephen, and hope you feel better soon.
Oh, thank
This
you.
is probably a good time to just say some housekeeping. If you feel like anybody would be interested in the live, please do share it. It'd be great if we can get to 100 shares. And also, if you can tap the screen to like, because that does help push it so that people who are not part of your friend group are able to pick it up in the FYP. Um, Danny's next. Danny, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, hi, doctor. Thanks for your time. I DM'd you uh really quickly, but I guess I can just ask you now. I'm just a beginner student of anarchism,
Mhm.
and I also have questions about AI, if you're familiar with,
Um,
advancements in AI. Uh,
um, a little bit. I keep at least a toe in that kind of stuff. One of the ways I was supporting myself before I managed to, I didn't start college until I was 30. I was always a nerd, but
yeah, I'm
I'm
28 and I'm
I'm a
about
working
to.
class kid.
Yeah,
I was a longshoreman and truck driver,
yeah.
but I managed to get out of that by getting into computers, and I was a network sysadmin for a while. So I still have some interest in technology enough that I still kind of follow some of the press, but not as closely as I would have 20 years ago. So um, only a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, me too. Seriously, but and that's funny because I'm 28 and I'm about to start college. I'm about to study
It's a
international
lot harder to
mediation.
start later.
I'm sorry?
It's a lot harder to go back later for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, it's funny. I think I'm more confident now because I've been actually, you notice my picture is Socrates or Socrates, and
Yeah.
yeah, and we're actually doing Socratic seminars right now, so it's kind of funny. But yeah, my question is, with all this disinformation, and the advancements in AI, it's going to be almost impossible to tell, what's not disinformation or misinformation or malinformation. So how do you use your discernment and, uh, decide what's fact and actual propaganda?
Um,
Do you understand what I'm asking?
yeah, I
Yeah.
do. The um the problem is in some ways I'm probably not a good person to give good advice there because I I'm very skeptical by nature and I learned how to do serious research decades ago. So when I see something that is instantly appealing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. I don't go in for like the confirmation bias kind of shit. I'm skeptical of every bit of news I run into. It's I on my phone this confuses a lot of people, but you look at one of like the home screens on there and there's like 30 different newspaper apps on there. If I see a really good article that's interesting about something, I look to see if other people are reporting it and if there's differences. And that's not something that I could suggest that people do because who the fuck has time to do that? I mean, on some level, I get paid to read, so I have time. And I have both time and some relevant skills. I think it's possible to learn a lot of those skills. They don't necessarily come from a particular place. You can teach even middle schoolers a lot of basic tools about how to verify what they're running into. What is a reputable source versus a disreputable source. And realistically, I wish people did that with younger people too, because I get people in college classes that don't understand that, say, a creationist website is not a really good source to use in a history paper, because they've never had somebody walk through how source bias works and how perspective is relevant. So there are good resources on that. I'm sure there's tons of like good tools and classes and whatnot, but I'm not sure I'm the best person to teach some of that kind of stuff either. So I'm not sure how much I can really
Okay.
offer
Yeah,
suggest.
yeah. More. I guess more productively. Can you give me like a favorite philosopher of yours that has to do with anarchism or maybe cynicism? And also like like a book or two just off the top of your head for like an introduction
Those
to
are
anarchy.
oh God, those are just terrible. Like who's your favorite philosopher is kind of like
Yeah,
what's your favorite band, and like I don't
true.
know, like I have 100,000 albums. What are you talking about? I don't know. I like music. So
Yeah,
um
I guess.
I mean, it's always like, okay, I can give you my top 100. But with philosophers, it depends. So you're thinking specifically thinkers in anarchism,
Yeah, like
specifically
I'm a very beginner
so
student.
political anarchist thinkers. Um, well, shit. Um, on some level, I'd probably have to stick with a really boring basic and just say Kropotkin is a great place for anybody to start. But there's a lot of I don't know. Malatesta is definitely worth reading, for example. Um, I still think that there's a lot of problems, especially in the way that he writes. I think that people like Stirner are actually very stimulating. There's a lot of wildly different positions you can take within the anarchist continuum that are all kind of worth reading. But if you got to pick like one person who's super influential, actually, no, I'm going to qualify that. Kropotkin is great. I'm probably going to lean toward Goldman because Goldman was one of my introductions to it. I ran into some of Emma Goldman's essays when I was quite young, and I was like, "What the fuck? Really?" And it just like kind of blew my little mind, and I just fell down a rabbit hole and never came out. Um, so I think that she's a really interesting communicator, and there's a wider range of interests. That's also, I think, one of the reasons I like Kropotkin too, because he was also interested in like not just politics, but also like science and philosophy and ethics, and he wrote on a ton of different issues. Goldman did too. She wrote on like feminism and like free love and all kinds of stuff there. It wasn't just all like unions and the state. They weren't stuck in one particular mode. And I think I related to that in both of those two thinkers, if that makes sense. Because I have pretty broad interests too. So, but yeah, I think I'd say Kropotkin and Goldman are the two places that I would most recommend people start. Just because they were so influential to me when I was young.
I want us to be fair to Danny before we move on. I think one of the questions he asked when he came up was a book on anarchists that he can read. So if I don't know if it's worth Danny DMing you and seeing if he can
In
get that.
So like as a general overview of anarchists or of anarchy, um, because I mean, let's see. Let me flip this thing for a second. So, Woodcock's anarchism is neat because it's sort of organized around a set of thinkers. He has like weird names for all of them, but it's like each of the chapters is on one of the kind of like more canonical sort of like anarchist thinkers that he then walks through and talks about what are the contributions there, what are the distinct things about it. And I think that might be a really good like starting place as an introduction to like the broader range of anarchist thought. Does that fit the the question?
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah. So
Um,
yeah, that might be a fun one there. But yeah, definitely send the DM. We can talk about other interests, especially as you keep reading too. Again, there's several shelves just on anarchist thought here. I've got tons of different directions we can go with that if you wherever you're interested.
both to you and also to Kim. If you haven't watched the documentary called Hypernormalization, I'd highly recommend it. It is free on YouTube. It's by Adam Curtis. Just because it talks a bit about how we got to the point of Cambridge Analytica. And also, it helps, I think, with the question that you asked with regards to AI. Um, not directly speaking to AI, but I kind of it offers some areas of thinking that I think you might find useful. And also, if I could just flag that Lisa has kindly been putting the books titles in the chat, so it's worth grabbing those while you can if you missed them earlier on. We will go to Free Palestine. Do you feel like you've asked your question, or can I jump to Cactus?
You could jump. Who to Nasser? Yeah, go ahead. I had a.
No, to Cactus, then Narcissus. If you have asked your question.
I'll take a. I have a little question after him. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. So I'll go to Cactus, then Nasser, and
Great.
then back to you. Go ahead,
Great.
Cactus.
Mime.
I was curious about two different things actually, that are both kind of ongoing. Is the geopolitical situation in Ethiopia and Eritrea and Venezuela and Guyana. I mean, that's obviously been a flashpoint for just a lot of just parties in general. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Each of the motivations there.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question. So Flashpoint. What do you mean? What are my thoughts? Thoughts on what?
Just the situation in Venezuela, because there was, there was just a narrative that Venezuela might annex 70% of Guyana, um,
Uh, it's um
and there was like kind of a weird like referendum thing.
yeah, it's okay. So where a lot of the borders are for a lot of these states was always kind of fuzzy because they're a bunch of settler colonies that were all just like carving up different indigenous lands, and at different times different surveys pointed to different areas and set different boundaries, and a lot of times they were just approximate boundaries because they hadn't fully explored areas because there's tons of like mountains and jungles and all kinds of shit and no one knew what the hell was in there. They just said, well, it's there. At one point Virginia went clear across to California. It was this giant ass triangle shooting across the continent because they had no freaking idea it was there. So the charter was written in a really weird way. A lot of colonial documents in Latin America are just as confused as that. And some of the conflict over that territory goes back into the 19th century. The U.S. almost went to war with the U.K. because of the complaints that they were making there, because of the whole Monroe Doctrine shit and this idea that the European powers had no place expanding their control in the Americas because it's ours. The U.S. was its own kind of like imperial power pretty early on, but the argument there was actually resolved in a sense because of American intervention. Because we stepped in, we got them to the table there and kind of like got them to agree to kind of like a binding mediation. And the Americans ended up picking a boundary that Venezuela wasn't happy with, but had to accept because they accepted those terms. The reason this has sort of come back more recently is twofold. One is more petrochemicals. Venezuela is a petrostate, and it's one that has struggled to maintain sufficient investment to keep efficiency up in its production, but it needs that money because that's how it funds everything. A lot of states become dependent. I mean, oil is in many ways a curse for countries that find it because it's too easy to become dependent upon it and then to avoid other areas of economic development. That's a trap a lot of states have fallen into. And Venezuela kind of needs new sources in order to keep up the flow. But a bigger reason ultimately is that the state is is challenged. It's the legitimacy of Maduro is a problem. And when governments feel threatened and parties feel threatened and they want to maintain their power, it's good to sort of rally around the flag every now and then. And there ain't nothing like a war to get people to rally around the flag. So I think that they're hoping that by hitting on this obscure 19th century territorial claim, that they can get people to, feel a new sense of Venezuelan nationalism and support his government. I don't think it's going to work, but I think ultimately that's the goal there.
And then with Ethiopia and Eritrea, what do you think the outlook is there? And then also, I guess Somalia slash Somaliland too would probably be involved, and Djibouti.
Yeah, that's a fun thing about. I would say these kind of conversations can go on long term because there's always conflicts. There's a lot of conflicts that I've at least paid some attention to, and plenty of others that I don't know enough about, and I would love to talk to other people who do know. I mean, there's always great things to talk about. In actually both of those situations in East Africa, the problem with a lot of this is that the borders are all artificial. The borders are all created by colonies, by imperial powers, and they don't really match the physical demography, the kind of local cultural and historical demography, and that creates a lot of fights, of tensions. And I don't see that really ending anytime soon because places have, well, over time adopted that 19th century European sense of nationalism. And it's, as we were talking about earlier just this evening, that leads to violence. When you tie a particular sense of self to a state, it tends to lead to conflicts, both inside the state and outside the state. So there's been several rounds of genocide just inside Ethiopia, even if you leave Eritrea out of it. Because different ethnic groups, when they're at times ascendant, have turned on other ethnic groups inside the state. So you've seen that among Tigrinya, you've seen that among the Amhara, and it's, I don't see that going away either, because when you take part of your identity and you make it political, it brings out some of the worst in our tribal inheritance. The issue with Somalia is in some ways easier because it's less a matter of a complex internal demography. I mean, Ethiopia has a very, very long and rich settled history and different ethnic groups and languages in the area that all have a sense of identity that pre-exists these different states. The situation in Somalia is largely a product of colonialism, because the country of Somalia was created by combining two completely different colonies, Italian Somaliland and British Somaliland. So they had a separate colonial history, and then they were squished together into one country. And when things went wrong, things started breaking down in it, well, part of it broke away that wasn't having those internal problems. So British Somaliland just said, fuck it, we'll be a separate country. But since World War II, it's gotten very difficult to change borders. There's a lot of prejudice in international politics against changing boundaries. So even though Somaliland has been a functionally independent country since 91 or something like that, no one recognizes it. They've got their own money. They've got everything. It's a functioning government, but no one can actually acknowledge the reality on the ground. We all want to hold to the fiction that Somalia is a single linked together place. Sometimes colonialism just does a real number on you. You've got a similar situation in Yemen, actually, because Yemen was originally two different territories. The North Yemen was originally part of the Ottoman Empire, and South Yemen was a British colony for a while. And the two of them squished together and created one country, and then kind of realized they don't really get along. And it just flares back up as little problems. It's because in those periods before, they were subject to different political pressures to develop a distinct identity tied to that earlier boundary. And now you change that boundary. You expand the definition, and that can be very difficult to do. it gets back to some of the same problem we keep dealing with in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's very difficult for Israelis to expand their concept of what it would mean to be in the same country, to include people who aren't Jews, for example. It's hard to like reconceive of your own identity, to expand it. And that's what you kind of would have needed to have really take root in a more united Somalia and a more united Yemen, is to get over the long periods of separate colonial history, if that makes some sense. I think in a way the international consensus around borders is kind of bullshit, that makes it so difficult for countries to break apart. But the other side of me keeps wanting to say that countries are bullshit anyway and borders are bullshit. So the more we keep breaking apart into smaller and smaller countries, the more we're like, feeding into nationalism anyway. So on some level, I think that we should all just find some ways to get along regardless. I don't know if there's a more specific question on either of those. I'm just kind of like wandering around here a bit. The more open ended the question is, the more I'll just tend to ramble.
Cactus, can I move on, or did you want to?
Yeah, but yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like with a lot of these regions, no matter how you divide it up to, there's no way a nation state would really work. Um, yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, no nation state actually works without violence. And it's either bloody sort of violence or a kind of cultural violence. At the end of the day, the only reason places like France look stable is because they had been imposing a single vision and committing a kind of cultural genocide for the last 200 years, wiping out a lot of their internal diversity. The reason that's more complicated in a lot of countries in, say, Africa, is that they have weaker state structures, so they can't impose the kind of structural violence that a lot of European states have done in order to force people into a particular mold. And with those weaker institutions, it means that people can fall back on their more local definitions of self and their local identities, and those will be different from what the country wants them to think that their identity is. So it's tricky. When we talk about how unstable a lot of these countries are and wanting them to be able to do that, in essence, you're kind of saying, we kind of want you to be able to do G-sides the way Europeans do. And that's kind of fucked up too. At the end of the day, we really should have reconceived of what countries really are again and not fallen down into this like nation state trap, because nation states require homogeneity to work. In order for a nation state to be stable, people need to have a common identity. And if one doesn't exist, you need to impose it on them. Hence, earlier in the conversation today, the sense of Italianness, manufacturing an Italian identity and then forcing Venetians and Sicilians to adopt it as their own. That requires force, and it's a kind of cultural genocide. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily a good thing. So, yeah, in the sense of these countries falling apart, okay, maybe that just means we needed to think about the state differently. Maybe Somalia shouldn't have been a nation state. Maybe that's the problem. And that's the same problem you basically got with Ethiopia and Eritrea, is they're developing a competing identity based around a particular ethnic conception of self that then has to exclude people. And it's one of the reasons you've had so many internal problems inside Ethiopia too, is it's struggling to apply the nation state model to an area that's historically very diverse. Somebody mentioned India earlier in the chat too. Same basic problem there. India is the size of frickin' the European Union. It's humongous, with a huge number of languages and cultures. So of course it's going to be problematic when you try to conceive of it as a nation state. They can't do it in the sense of a common language because they don't really have one. But what they can do is focus on things like Hindu nationalism. And that has a lot of downsides to it. So the more we try to squish people into the nation state model, the more it creates a lot of these problems in the world. And it's astonishing just to me, looking at this, that it's not more obvious to more people in the world that this is just a fucked up situation. Why are we trying to do it? Why do we keep trying to squish square pegs into round holes and then complaining when it doesn't fit? No kidding, it doesn't fit. The nation state model hasn't worked anywhere without massive violence. Like nowhere. But
Yeah,
we
I
keep
mean,
trying to force
India
it.
is. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say India is particularly concerning because the
Oh,
uh, the nationalism was sort of fomented out of the unification against British imperialism, but whether or not that was necessary for the uh, just the separation from the UK uh,
stop.
I mean, is kind of like.
Well, the identity they were trying for, or at least that many of the agitators were trying for under the Raj, a a more cosmopolitan sense of identity. It was more diverse, and it didn't even have to split along these religious lines. That was that was a minority opinion at the time, and it's had disastrous consequences.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's concerning that it did, like the whole Hinduva stuff did kind of even predate that, but it ended up kind of, I mean, it's now like the dominant political force in India.
right. And so too did some people pushing for the separate Muslim state too. There were some that wanted that too. That wasn't entirely Britain's idea, but it was still a minority view, and it became significant on both sides of that artificial boundary, with again really regrettable consequences. If India presented an interesting possibility for a truly pluralistic multi-ethnic democracy to actually work, and I was I wish that that had not had the kind of interference. Honestly, the division was in part intended to reinforce the structural power imbalances with Europe. It kept it weaker because there was a possibility of an alternative, more cosmopolitan model there, and there still are elements of that in India. It is still by far the largest democracy in the world and has a lot of languages. And you don't have significant independence movements. People aren't fighting for a whole bunch of separate let's break hey, stop. Hey, come on, my nose is itching. My nose is itching. Yeah, she seems to know when my antihistamines are running down because I have to take them several times a day, and that's when she super wants lots of attention. And like, oh well.
Hey, doctor. Yeah, I just so I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Ida Berry.
Dr. Which?
She has Dr. Ida. She's on TikTok.
Oh, no,
Uh,
probably not.
well, she I just want to she I just want to spread awareness about her page. But so I'm also dealing with this thing like it feels like I just woke up from being brainwashed, if you know what I mean, and ontological shock and like everyone there's hundreds of people in my area that just do not care about a current genocide going on on TikTok. I mean, I don't understand how like I show them. Try to spread awareness and that's tough in itself doing that. And even just witnessing this stuff, I feel like I have a civic duty to tell people, like Plato says. Um, but how do you deal with the ontological shock of this? And like it's just really hard for me right now. Like, but it's also motivating me, it's waking me up and
Well, move on to that. I'd say try to find something positive about it. Think in terms of again
yeah,
reaching out to other people, building solidarity groups and whatnot. It'll help reinforce it, and the more we can lend each other strength, the more it helps because it's really easy for people to get discouraged, and I've seen it over and over again. I mean, I this is not new in the sense that I've been talking about unfolding genocides over and over and over again. In Tibet or Rwanda or Sudan, or just, like over and over again, these things just keep happening. And every time you bring them up, you're like, where's that? Where's that? Who are those people? I don't know those people. And who has time for that? Because one of the tricks about neoliberalism is about keeping us so busy and distracted because we're all just struggling to survive, that who has the time or emotional energy to deal with this? It's If you try to let it in, it's profoundly depressing. I know a lot of friends of mine who are genuinely good hearted people that would really care, that they'd be great to have on your side, but it's so emotionally exhausting to them to look at this news. They just don't have the space for it, and if they let it in at all, it could break them. And that's kind of deliberate. This society intentionally constructs that to make it harder for us to do anything about it. So there are systemic factors to push back in it as well, but we, in these kind of communities, both here and in the real world, can find ways to lean on each other and support each other. And as long as there's a sense that working together, things can get better, even if there are setbacks here and there are problems, we can keep fighting. And by spreading more and more of this awareness, we can help. So maybe today no one knows about who Palestinians are. And yeah, a lot of people still have no freaking idea there. But how is that really different from, the Rohingya? People haven't heard of them either, right? Or who was paying attention to what was happening in Sri Lanka for a long time? It's just, there's so many issues, right? Or the whole Armenian Azeri conflict. There's conflicts like this all over the place. Or God, freaking Western Sahara. We could just go on and on and on and on about conflicts that people have never heard of. And huge numbers of people are unaliving all the time that no one's ever heard of. I am still consistently amazed that it could reach the numbers of like 7 million lost in the Eastern Congo, and still Americans had no fucking idea. Because the media wasn't going to talk about it. No one was going to talk about it. No one knows who these people are. Just irrelevant. And it gets very, very frustrating to try and bring that stuff up. But what helps is knowing at least some other people who do care and being able to lean on each other, I think. So that's how I would deal with some of the shock there,
Yeah, thanks. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Had several questions you want to come up on. Liam, how much longer do you think you want to go on for today? Because I know you've done a lot of these lives, so we want to be fair.
Well, yeah, and I'll probably do a lot more of them coming up, but what we should probably do is at least get in the habit of like trying to keep them only to like just, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, not let them go on and on and on. And if we do that, I can fit them in a little bit more often during the break here too. But yeah, I think I'd like to wind down within the next 10-15 minutes. Because in the morning I got to take the truck into the shop and see if I can get a problem fixing that, because I still got to get some more parts and whatnot, and it's dying. I started up and then engine just dies.
So I think finishing after Nazir might be or Nasir might be a good time because it's a natural break. But go ahead, Nazir.
Yeah, so the last person, and then we can wind down. Yeah.
Perfect.
First, I want to ask one question, then I want to discuss something you mentioned on the live today and earlier. So about organizing like the working class internationally, what do you think about what Hugo Chavez suggested years ago about creating a fifth internationality? Do you think that's viable now? To be honest, me as a Marxist, I can't view it as viable. I can't view it as something that's possible to happen.
Yeah, Marxists love hating each other already. And once you like expand it to other non-Marxist socialists too, it gets even more complicated. I think it just gets back to the fact that we're already so divided that it wouldn't really work easily. And I guess one of the reasons I was most skeptical about it at the time it was mentioned too was, and I used to have like long debates with a friend of mine in graduate school who was a Marxist and a real fan of Hugo Chavez. And again, I'm an anarchist, so I'm skeptical of people making the kind of claims that he was. And in the long run, it turned out he was fairly corrupt. But still some good ideas in there. I mean, in some ways, with a lot of people like that, you can see sometimes like the heart might be in the right place, but also it's in the wrong place too. Um, there was a lot of problems with the Bolivarian Revolution. Um, but I think that was one of the reasons that that kind of call rang hollow for me, because it would be something that he would have been trying to steer. And I don't think that would work either. I think groups would just fall on each other and tear each other apart. I mean, how do you still can't get, a lot of different groups within like the broader Marxist family to talk to each other or even acknowledge each other exists. And some of them have turned so insular that they're practically cults. Um, I think that is a really toxic dynamic, and it's in part a response to long-term state oppression that has helped to balkanize people. But some of it's just socialists, creating a circular firing squad themselves, getting too caught up in needing a sort of purity of vision rather than focusing on the broader strategic objectives or the real enemies. I think that there's a lot of work that would have to happen for people to learn to get along and work with each other again before you could build broader organizations like that again. I would honestly love to see something like that come back, though. But I don't see any chance of it in the near term.
Yeah, me neither, to be honest. I I don't see us like for me like working with a trot. I find it like almost impossible to, but like that's fair
Why?
enough. I admit it.
Oh, but trots are so cuddly. Come on.
Uh,
Yeah, see, I
yeah,
don't.
there's like
It's the funny part for me is like I can see good things in every one of these interpretations. For me, and I think one of the things that helps me, and this gets back to the previous question too about how to like keep your spirits up when you're like being awakened to different problems in the world, is I'm I study a lot of really depressing shit, but I'm always one of those like silver linings kind of people. I like trying to look for the best in people, the best in situations. So it's not just looking for the best in humans to try and like work with anybody, but also in different ideologies. Like what are the common denominators? So I can sit down and actually have very, very productive conversations with right-wing libertarians, because in some areas their heart's in the right place. In other areas, they're completely batshit crazy and deluded. But you can start with the places of overlap, find those areas of common interest, and that opens up a wedge. It opens up a possibility of wider engagement, and you can spend time talking to them, and you can find places where over time you can influence them. I know personally in my offline life several right libertarians who became leftists over many years of just engaging with me. And it wasn't even intentional. I wasn't like, trying to like infect them or something, but I was having a lot of patient conversations, explaining my position on something, and, like, oh, well, that's an interesting thought, but what about this? And then like leaving thoughts behind. And over time, they drifted away. One of them, you might be happy, actually became a Marxist. He's actually a tanky, and I didn't do that. but as he got into the left, he got deeper and deeper into it, and that's the direction he went. But hell, at least he's not a Rand Paul supporter anymore. So job well done as far as I'm concerned. But a lot of that just comes out of patient conversation with people in your own circles. Our personal connections to people really, really matter. And if we're willing to have those kind of dialogues, I think we can get over anything. It's just a matter of being able to look for the commonalities. And if Maoists and Stalinists and Trots can all find, okay, yeah, we agree on like all this shit, we just have these areas of disagreement, let's use those areas as the start to something and build on that. I think that's the hardest thing to do, is being open enough to those differences to have the discussions in the first place.
yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. To be honest, it's like maybe it's from my experience been a bit difficult working with them, but I agree with you like to a high extent. There
I,
is also one thing I want to discuss. It
I
was
honestly, I've had problems working with Marxists of every stripe too, but that's just me as an anarchist. I mean, yeah, things can be difficult, but difficult doesn't necessarily mean bad. It depends on how you want to approach it, you know. So again, it's like one of those like
exactly.
glass half full sort of things. I tend to try to focus on the good to try and like push things forward instead of getting hung up.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. No, you're about to have a difficulty about working with a Marxist right now. What I'm about to discuss now. So, like today and yesterday on the live, like you mentioned today that nationalism will always leads to racism, and also I believe yesterday you mentioned like for example what happened on the 7th of October when you something happened to civilians on the other side.
Mhm.
You are giving justification to do for the other side to do as well. So in that scenario, you cannot argue that the I I heard that wrong.
I'm not sure I understand
I'm
what
sorry.
who gave justification for what.
I mean, if like one side find it justifies attacking civilians, then you justify for the other side to attack civilians as well, because like it's like
No one. I don't think anybody has. I wouldn't justify that for anybody. My
yeah.
perspective of it is that it's illegitimate for everyone.
Like right now the thing is yeah, and I want to like merge it with the idea that both like nationalism and like always will lead to racism. The thing is like okay, in like we're gonna go to this specific topic. In Palestinian view, most of the Israelis are not considered as civilians, they're considered as colonizers, which but it's not my point here. I like this one. I can throw away from the window. I don't care about it. The thing is, when we equate like both nationalism, like for example, let's say the French nationalism under the Yazidi occupation with the Yazidi occupation, we're equating one that's oppressed.
Was that the
I
internet?
think he's got reception problems.
What's that?
Nasir, I don't know
Um.
if you've moved.
Oh, there's little bars there. Is that what that
Yeah,
says? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a bummer. Is it actually is a really interesting question. I think he's headed toward because we talked about something at the very beginning of the discussion tonight. We're kind of like hitting at a place where it actually is problematic. So it'd be nice if it pops back in. We'll see if
yeah,
he.
it
We'll see if
sounded like
Marcus
his
will really
reception
come up.
had disappeared. So
Yeah,
hopefully he will come back. In the meantime,
yeah. We'll
let's.
give it a few minutes.
There was one last point I wanted to touch on with the earlier discussion. Um, so given a lot of what we had discussed today, what is the healthiest place for both Palestinians and Israelis to be able to take that doesn't discount who they are in their individual identities, but to be able to form a single identity that, and I hate to say nation, but yeah, that forms a nation that will work in a healthier way.
Well, at the end of I mean, I can see where it's coming from in kind of like emotional sense of identities, but at the end of the day, I can't even imagine why it's a question on some level because okay, so just thinking of my like local identity in California, right? I mean, so some of my neighbors are Sikhs and some of them are Mormons and some of them are Muslims and like who cares? It has nothing to do with anything at all. I know people who their native language is a whole bunch of different. I mean, okay, so I've got a native Gujarati speaker here and native Vietnamese speaker here. So what? Um, on some level, you can hold to elements of your own identity without closing yourself off to new hybrid forms and with creating a kind of like cosmopolitan identity. It's not necessarily a matter of needing all to blend into a kind of like melting pot sort of ideal. The people in the U.S. always used to love that idea of, oh, it's a melting pot. Realistically, the U.S. is more of a salad bowl, throwing a whole bunch of things together and giving it a distinct shape. It's all in the salad, but there's tons of differences within it. And for me, I love the fact that there's a taco truck on every street. That's great. That's enriching to my life. But the people in the taco truck might have a different identity and might speak a different language at home than I do. And that's fine too. It's not actually a threat to who I am. In the long run, I think that's the kind of thing that Palestinians and Israelis will have to grapple with. That the existence of one neighbor speaking Hebrew and another speaking Arabic doesn't hurt anybody. You get to keep your own traditions, go about your own lives. You can create your own social circles, or you can broaden them, and you can interact with people. People are always going to learn those other languages. There are 3 official languages in Israel already. I mean, there's no reason why, if you take away the racism, that people wouldn't maybe take more seriously learning Arabic in schools in order to be able to communicate with Palestinians, in the same way that I know tons of super white bread, gringo Californians who learn Spanish in order to interact with tons of people around them who are native Spanish speakers, which is great. Spanish speakers learn English speakers learn Spanish. We're all enriched by that process. I think the situation that they have is a lot easier than some much more complicated, larger states with a far greater number of ethnicities into it. It's just that there's a lot of passions here because there's a ton of generational trauma on both sides. It would take generations, not just a little time, like a lot of time, but it's possible. It could happen. We just need to kind of point things in the right direction for that. But
Yeah, no, I mean,
it won't be
absolutely. I
easy.
do think that people's individual identities need to be respected. Um, it's more the sense of, what is that shape that they can hold, that is giving them that, that contains the salad, even though, each element of the salad is
Right,
going to be should be respected.
right.
How do they then collectively come together? Because if you if you see it as Israeli, then it leans towards a trauma
Mhm.
of a colonizing power that has, taken away, land and so on. But if you go towards Palestinian, then people who identify as Israeli feel lost in that. And as somebody in the comments said, but wasn't it Palestine pre 1948? I think that's really where the sticking point for a lot of this, for a lot of people, is who are somewhere in the middle of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. But at a certain point, so much time has passed that what can you really do about it? I mean, sure, there are some people that still think East Prussia should be German, but does it matter? They're like old people at this point. It's gone. That's only 1945. It's a very similar time period, and it's a significant shift in terms of what that land means to people. It's just everything's in the so saying, yeah, it was Palestine before. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that people have developed a distinctly Zionist identity that existed even before that period. Going into the later 19th century and the earlier waves of settlement. That's who they think that they are. So that's the biggest problem that I have with it, because for me, I would like more of a unitary identity, but again, I'm more of a cosmopolitan anyway. But neither term works. Neither Israel nor Palestine would work because they both play on generational traumas for people. So it would have to be something entirely different, or you come up with a hybrid. And some people, and some of my friends worked with this, and I actually helped edit a book on this once. On a parallel states solution, which would be 2 different governments occupying exactly the same land. So anyone could live anywhere, but you would identify with a different government, sort of like akin to like the Ottoman Millet system almost. But I personally prefer a more constitutional solution that essentially acknowledges two identities, 2 names. So sort of the way that like Belgium is constituted on some levels, although a little bit less territorially focused. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you speak like French or Dutch. If you're Flemish or Walloon, you're both Belgian. And there's a single hybrid identity. And the country has multiple names. It has like 3 official names. It has 3 official languages, because the small German minority too. But there's and that's fine, and it holds itself together. It struggles at times, but it holds itself together. Um, and honestly, if the world can eventually start moving away from this whole nation state idea, places like Belgium wouldn't struggle at all. It only struggles because there are certain forces inside of that push people toward ethno-nationalism, but that's the disease we have to overcome, and it's a disease that Israelis and Palestinians will have to overcome at some point. But for me, the shorter term solution is just to create Israel/Palestine, Palestine/Israel. Like literally have a country with 2 names, 2 flags, different languages, and you can call it whatever the hell you want. Like your passport is going to say Israel/Palestine or Palestine/Israel. It's going to have both on there. And you can say, I live in Palestine or I live in Israel, and it doesn't matter, because it's exactly the same country. It's weird, but it would work. I think that as a model, it would kind of get over that initial hump, because neither name could work for the other. They both are freighted with too much history and pain. So
Thank you. I think that's definitely things that people need to start possibly getting their head around. And I think we've talked about a lot that maybe people need to unpack. So one thing that Stephen mentioned that I wanted to touch on is, if people feel that it's necessary, maybe consider opening a live after this to be able to deep dive more in some of the things that, not yourself, but people in the chat, in the live at the moment, considering doing that, just so that they can explore things that they feel like they want to deep dive more into. Because I have seen that things that are mentioned in this live do then get carried on to other lives, and it has helped people shift their thinking on things, which I think shows how having context for some of the things people have heard has helped and has been very useful for moving the conversation forward. I don't know if Nasir is able to come back, but maybe I
yeah,
could
but
try and DM
if
him.
somebody, if you or other people, and I made a little note, but I sometimes don't even remember what the hell I meant when I write things down. But if we can try to remember to come back to that, because I think he was heading in a really interesting direction on the whole question of nationalisms. And I've had a lot of conversations with people with like the whole anti-colonial nationalisms and whatnot. It's there. It's a really, really interesting topic. And there are places where I really do understand why it's viewed differently and why it's seen in a kind of like liberatory manner. But it does have its dark sides as well. And if you go down the road part way to achieve a particular objective, it opens itself up to later problems. And I think we're already seeing some of that in the Palestine issue. I think it's something we were starting with earlier today. Oh, did he pop in? Well, maybe if we can do it quickly enough, because we're already past my time. But
Yeah,
uh, let's see if we
let's see if
if
he
we
could
can,
come up. Yeah,
let's see if we can keep it shorter, and then we can come back to it a different day too. Because again, I think it's a fascinating topic, and I've had a lot of really fun conversations with people on that one.
Nasser,
I
what
am
do you want to
sorry,
do?
my internet like
Do you want to cover it
went off.
now, or do you
I'm
want to
not.
put a pin on it for next time if you feel like you want to explore it fully?
I believe. I think my opinion is. I think it would be better for the next live because I think it will like take much of your time, and I wanna keep you up late actually. So if that works with you, it works with me. I'm like always
Fine.
tuned in to your live. It's like I love it to be honest. So yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Perfect.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Anytime. Yeah. Again, I think it's a fascinating topic. So definitely bring it up.
Brilliant. Nasser, if you can DM it to me as well, I can make sure that we definitely cover it the next time. And I'll also DM you so that you know that when Liam is live as well.
I'll
Oh, I think I think his sometimes TikTok is working against you in terms of the internet. But there we are. Yeah, so if anybody is planning on opening a live after this, now is your opportunity to put it in the chat. and people can maybe follow you or trying to pick it up. But otherwise, I think today's live
Sounds good.
was actually very productive.
Yeah,
I thought it
thanks.
was a very interesting discussion today.
Yeah, and like I said, that I can try some earlier in the day as well. This coming week, it just depends on what I'm doing on any given day, but I can start some in the afternoon or early evening or whatever. So we can try and mix it up a little bit while we can. So,
And
but by the
Danny,
way, I'll be back soon.
brilliant. Danny, one last thing. It might be a good idea if you put Dr. Ida's maybe one of her videos in your repost, and then that way people can find it and you can signpost to it.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for the
No problem at
advice.
all.
Yeah, I just want to say, Dr. Omara, thank you for doing this. I know it takes a lot of time, so it seriously is like, I mean, so educational. I love it, but I just want to return my gratitude. Uh, so thanks.
So I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, this is proving to be surprisingly relaxing for me. I'm I've I've often struggled to slow my head down so I can go to sleep. So I had fallen into a lot of habits like later in the day I stop reading, I stop trying to like think about things, and I just like tune into some really cheesy ass TV show or something like some like sci-fi or some cartoon or something like that that'll just
Mm.
help me relax a little bit. And I thought that I needed that. But honestly, it seems that conversation does the same thing, even though it's on a stimulating topic, because it's not reading; it's using something different here. So this is often relaxing enough to me that I'll go straight to sleep. And it's definitely a more productive use of my time than watching some superhero show.
Yeah, I
So
agree. I mean, this stuff like changed my life. I mean, I ever since, it's about October, obviously. That's when I first heard about this craziness. So I felt isolated and decided to come on here and talk about it, and it helps a lot, and I feel like it changed my life, and I'm learning so much. But yeah.
yeah, no, I'm so happy to be able to. And I'll contribute any what little bit I can to that, and as long as people get value out of it, I'll keep doing this because it works well for me. It's so I'm happy to do this. By the time you get to evening anyway, even during the semester when I'm super busy and I'm driving a lot, by the time it gets to evening, I can't do anything really productive anyway. I'm too tired from the drive. Like it hits me emotionally. Like I can't focus on much. But this apparently doesn't wear me down at all. This is fine. So I'm perfectly happy to have these conversations. It relaxes me. I get to go to sleep. Works well for everybody. And if it provides some stimulation, if it helps people out, then fantastic. I am super happy to contribute.
Last point for the evening. Did I hear you correctly when you said that you had 100,000 albums?
Oh, yes, actually.
Wow.
Um,
So the book, the
I have
books
a
were enviable enough.
yeah, no, I have a massive music collection. I mean, it's and like genre wise, I'm all over the place. I mean, I'm like Sinatra 1 minute, death metal the next. I mean, it's all over the place. Um, but yeah, I've been collecting music my whole life too. I used to go into like the libraries and just copy stuff. Um, uh, okay, so one like fun thing here, and mind you, I'm only discussing how this works in Minecraft. But if you have a Linux computer in Minecraft, it's not actually possible to work with some mediums without them having to work around encryption. And it allows very easily to copy stuff anyway. So I got into a lot of that kind of stuff really early on and making like, home mixes of stuff, copying CDs, things like that. So I used to go to libraries and just copy stuff out of the library. But I bought tons of CDs over the years, and I buy like, digital albums here and there. There's all kinds of ways you can get stuff and expand it. But my interests are so variable, and I, for a long time, lived in places where even if I wanted to stream music or movies or something, I couldn't because the internet was terrible. I lived for 12 years in a place where the house literally could not be wired for internet. It was not possible. So I stuck with a habit of like putting a lot of things on little flash drives, and I stick a little flash stick in my car, and I'll have like a few hundred albums on there, and I've got stuff to listen to. So that kind of stuck with me. But yeah, I like a lot of stuff. Music is
Um,
great.
uh, have you ever heard of well, he was mainly on YouTube, Twitter, and now I think he's moved on to TikTok. But somebody called the Needle Drop,
Nope.
Anthony Fantano. Yeah, he's a music critic that talks a lot about albums and everything. That's yeah, I think it's an interesting. I mention him because he's kind of one of the few places where people really talk about music and explore the whole album and everything. Really enjoy some of
Yeah,
his videos. I'll
that
send it
was
to you, India.
fun for me. Like, I never got into like the singles culture. Like, I always got into albums, and some of that might just be generational, but it might just be personality too. I used to like I want to put out the record and listen to all the songs through it and feel how it all works. Where I've got friends that'll just play the same song over and over again or the same handful of songs, and they're perfectly happy with that. I need to hear something in its own context. I've always got more interested in that. So album culture was super important for me. There's as a fun one, just thinking of social media type stuff. I had someone challenged me about this a few years ago, and I decided to start doing it. This is now I'm near the end of the third year. I share a different artist every day from somewhere around the world around noonish, around lunch. So I do like a lunchtime listens, and I bounce around from country to country, and I tend not to go to the English speaking ones very often. So I'll occasionally play an Australian or whatever here, but I figure a lot of Americans are more familiar with songs from English speaking worlds anyway, even though not all of them. So sometimes when I do go there, I get like more obscure, but I've played stuff from like every country in the world already, and some of them show up more than others, but I bounce around constantly, and it's sort of fun to kind of keep mixing up the genres too. So you go from like folk to electronic to metal to blues and whatnot, and it and some people really like it, and I'm sure most people just ignore me on it. It's just like another quirk of mine, but
No,
I've,
I can relate.
but
Um,
I've got a lunchtime listen every day, and it just gets an opportunity to bring some attention to some like artists somewhere that may never have been listened to by people in California.
Really hope you're able to to bring some of that to TikTok because yeah, I love discovering new music. I used to do something similar on Instagram where for 30 days I shared um, a a track from one African artist from a particular country. So I couldn't
Mhm.
repeat the country, and I had to. I mean, some countries it was very easy for me to do that. Other countries it was very difficult. But that exploration really helped me get to understand different sounds and how each country has its own unique, um, yeah, unique sound. Some of them I actually didn't realize I was I was able to identify. So around East Africa, for example, the way music from Congo and music from Kenya and Uganda sounds very similar because of the guitar sounds that they use. But yeah, no, it's very interesting. So I hope you're able to bring that. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think
there's
that's a
across like West Africa because there's a continuum in like instrument types. So there are certain tones and structures and chord progressions and whatnot that are common in a lot of West African countries, but that don't show up elsewhere. I mean, different regions in the world all have something like that, which is it's fascinating to find. There's similarities and there's always these neat differences. So I appreciate it a lot. I don't know how to do something like that on TikTok, but I'm on like what is it? Twitter, Threads, Mastodon, Facebook, Instagram. So like when I post the lunchtime listens, it goes to all five of those each day.
oh, brilliant. I'll seek it out. But yeah, no, I'll find a way to see if I can make some suggestions on how you can do it on TikTok because yeah, definitely the TikTok community needs to broaden
That's
its horizons.
that's a fun one too. If you do go to look, just to make this easier, because I post a lot of stuff on social media in general, and these posts obviously get buried and stretch back over 3 years. But I created a separate Facebook page where they're all there, so it'll go back through it. So you could just scroll back through the lunchtime listens Facebook page and maybe find something interesting there. But I've got a ton of them in a spreadsheet already, and I think of new people all the time. I will probably keep doing it for years and years still, because there's so much out there people have never heard of. So it's a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. Again, thank you so much for today, and we really appreciate your time as always. I hope your back is feeling better as well.
Yeah, back feels pretty good. Granted, I'll get back to it. That got sore because a lot of it I had to do pretty low down, to put like the chicken wire on the bottom edges and whatnot, and I had to crawl around in a few places. Not good for me. But
Oh man, I used to live work exchange in Hawaii, and I kind of was more towards the off-grid lifestyle, self-sufficient farming and that type of stuff. Are you off-grid or anything like that, like self-sufficient or
not
uh
here. I was closer to it in the last house. My water came from a well in the last place I lived. But it wasn't entirely off grid. They later reconnect the house when it was built wasn't connected at all, but they later connected it to electricity at least. But everything else was local to it. So it's septic, well, everything. Here, the only thing that's like that is it's septic and not a sewer. But everything else, I'm connected to local utilities. Um, I have more neighbors here too, but it's than I did in the last place. And where I lived before for about a dozen years, my closest neighbor was a mile away. Here, there's actually a neighborhood around me, but I'm in a tiny mountain community, so overall the community is quite small, but the houses are a little closer together. So it's an interesting transition for me. I'm still kind of getting used to the fact that there are some neighbors around. Fortunately, some of the houses near me are only part timers, so they're not here a lot. So it's still pretty quiet.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good time to end that. But
Alrighty.
yeah, I hope you get a good night's sleep.
Well,
And thanks again,
good
everyone.
night from my mountain fortress, and we'll
See you
see y'all sometime
guys.
soon.
Yep, see you guys.
See you guys. Bye.
Have a good night.